Welcome to our special meeting for the Village of Hampton Hills, November 14, 2024, 6:30 p.m. Nick, would you lead us in the pledge? And everybody rise to the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our usual clerk is not here this evening. She's at another meeting, I believe in East Dundee. And so we'll move on to public comments. Anybody have public comments?
Roll call. Yeah, I can read the roll.
You have the roll call?
Yeah.
Okay.
So roll call, trustee Bodnar?
Here.
Trustee Burson?
Here.
Trustee McKelvey?
Here.
Trustee Millett?
We'll need a motion to accept trustee Millett to join the vote.
Second.
Moved by Jim Kelby, second by Ed Muncy. Roll call?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, you're good. You're good to say you're on by telephone. Okay? He said yes, he's good.
Okay. Oops, where was it? Trustee Muncy?
Here?
Trustee Williams?
Here.
President Wozniacki?
Present. All right, we'll move on to public comments. Anybody have a public comment? Any speakers? How about that?
I do want to comment, there was someone who wrote an email this afternoon.
Okay.
And that email is in a packet of papers on your desk. Seth, I don't know if we're gonna read it in, but it's there for you to consult.
Can you?
From Seth Holman.
It's good. Grab it there. It's a short.
Want me to read it? Yes, I'll read this in.
Yes.
This is from Seth Holman. Quote, "Thank you again to the Zoning Commission for their excellent job on the updated zoning ordinance. This is a much improved and simplified code. It's easier to understand, easier to enforce, and strikes a good balance of freedom and sensible regulation. I wanted to specifically highlight my support for the updated language for accessory dwelling units. This is a much improved section of the code. I hope that the village board will continue its support for this language. I personally see this as a benefit to my family as it allows us the option to build a dignified living situation for our aging grandparents and allows for us to care for them. In the future, it would allow our children the option to get started on the right foot without being straddled in debt. The deed restrictions on family members only are appropriate, and I support this protection. Thank you, Seth Holman, 42 West, 714 McDonald Road."
714.
714, I'm sorry. 714.
Okay. Moving on, we'll give the floor to Administrator Murray.
Yes, this is kind of order of events for tonight that the staff has put together, and we'll start appropriately with ADUs. There was some discussion amongst members and the public about detached ADUs. Somehow in the future may be a problem with Airbnb or rental units and the appropriateness of adding detached ADUs. So I'd like to know, and it could just be a yes, you'd like to keep them, or no, you'd like to remove them, and be that quick as a matter. So how many yeses do we have to keep detached ADUs? How many no's?
No.
I would say the consensus then for the scribe to delete detached ADUs.
They were all no?
They're all no's.
Okay.
So is there any desire to further restrict or add to language on the attached ADUs that have separate entrances and stuff?
Yes, I have some interest.
Trustee
I don't think
Muncy?
this was-
Go ahead.
Okay. On the attached
two changes that I can see. There's now a must share a 20-foot party wall, and the attached ADU must have a separate entrance and exit, where it could have, it said may have a separate entrance or exit, but is not required in our last 2023 zoning. I'd like to hear why we feel, the zoning commission felt that there should be a shared 20-foot party wall, and why, in addition to that, there needs to be a separate entrance exit. There was something about there was some expectation of privacy. It's an attached ADU, that's a family's decision. It's not up to us to tell them whether or not how much privacy they have. So, and again, I'd like to hear what's the reasoning for those two things.
Go ahead, Jim.
So for the separate exit, it was felt that this is a separate dwelling unit, and therefore it should have its own separate exit or entrance. For the party wall, that was put in to prevent someone, and that was added, I think, before we made the final decision on detached. It seems like we're scrapping now. But that was inserted to prevent someone from building a breezeway lengthy that would lead back to what was essentially a detached unit. So if you have a 20-foot common wall requirement, party wall requirement would prevent someone from doing that and trying to skirt that regulation.
Thank you for that. Based on that, just one trustee like everybody else has, I'm probably fine with the party wall of 20.
Your mic.
Sorry, twice. I don't know if 20 feet is too small or too big. I get the party wall now, that makes sense. The separate exit, I think, should still stay as a may. I think it should be an option, not a requirement. That would be my opinion.
I think if you don't have a separate entrance and exit, it's not an ADU. It's just an addition to your house. It is the simple way of looking at it. There are perhaps some other details about what are allowed in an ADU, but I think that's a fundamental distinction for most people. So I don't think it's a judgment on what a family can or can't do. If the family would like to add an addition onto their house and have a family member move in there and not call it an ADU and not have a separate entrance, they certainly can do that. There was a restriction on the size of ADUs above garages at 900 square feet. I'm not sure why, that seemed a little arbitrary. Other than that, at the suggestion of Trustee Boatner, I would like to also voice my support for a language that attempts to make it clear that this is still intended to be single-family home use. And on one of the pages that I handed out to you folks, it's titled Proposed Amendment 3. If you look on the back side of it, where we talk about ADUs, paragraph D says single-family home use, properties designated for single-family residential use must retain their status as single-family homes. Any attempt to convert, rent, or sell an existing single-family home as a multi-unit residence must apply for a rezoning of the property. Does it do everything that we might want to do to protect the village? I don't know, but the concern that we were trying to get at is that we understand and believe that virtually everyone who is contemplating an ADU for an aging relative, a sibling, a cousin, whoever it might be, virtually everyone who's contemplating that has good intentions and is going to make every attempt to follow the rules. It's the subsequent uses of that space that concern us and concern me, and in conversations with some of the other trustees, that concerns seem to be shared. And I think it was also shared by staff. So this provision was intended, along with a couple of other provisions that apply to attached ADUs already from the 2023 ordinance, to make it clear that it's not a duplex, right? You don't get a separate address, you don't get a separate utility billing, and so forth. So I'm suggesting right now this additional language to clarify that it's a single-family use.
And before we move on with that type of language be beneficial to preventing future zoning friction from,
It seems reasonable.
it did to me as well, so.
I have a question for trustees first, if that's okay.
Trustee Lucy.
So first of all, on, I assume direct communication is fine, this is a informal, whatever. The ADUs above garages, I agree with you, it should be the size of the garage, the footprint of the garage, that was for detached garage. Maybe we just ask the staff to say, if it's an ADU above a garage that's attached, and it has the party wall requirement, and it meets our attached ADU, I don't think 900 square feet needs to be a requirement, right?
I think that's a good clarification on attached versus detached.
Okay.
I think the point was on detached.
Yeah, okay, great. And then the second thing is, on page 52, at the very top, E, restrictions on residency. I was thinking, I like where trustee Person and Boner are going in their heads on we need to limit who's living in this thing, but I thought we kind of addressed it with that statement. We could read through that and see, that makes it single family and it has to be recorded that way. And maybe we also ask Carmen, is that enough, or are the additional statements that were suggested also a good idea?
I think the additional language doesn't take away from that, and it just makes it crystal clear that somebody buys a house, they can't go, I have it, except I get to have a real investment property now. No, our zoning code is clear there, this other language makes it even stronger. It doesn't weaken that, it
Great, if that's the case,
it strengthens
I think
it.
it's a good idea.
So, is there consensus on both of these changes, to eliminate the square footage and just make it whatever's above the attached garage is allowed? And we add the language to belt and suspender to make it crystal clear you don't have a duplex when you sell it.
I'll like that.
Yes.
Consensus?
Yes.
And the Scrivener understands it?
I will when I listen to the minutes again.
Okay, we'll move on.
Hopefully this one is just a straight up consensus of hands. There's been some debate on the open space map. So we've decided to take the draft map that we were saying would be part of the update to the comprehensive plan, to attach that map as an appendix that would be referenced, and Jim's got some language where he referenced the open space. So we wouldn't be changing the official zoning map in any fashion. We would just add an appendix that would refer open space, see appendix 1, for the overlay of the map. And every time we do a map update of the zoning map, we can update that appendix to be more clear on different parcels. And recently done some research with Kathleen and Judy. It does appear the infamous, famous Dunkin' Donuts site next to the Helping Hands and over by the Balmoral, that they did, in fact, the owner of record change that to open space, and that's how it's being taxed. So we could add that to the map before when you vote on it for next Tuesday, we'll try to have that map piece in the appendix updated. But we'll continue as we get information, work to update the open space and get it clear on not just where it is open space by the definition of zoning code, but also how who owns it and controls it. We'll put in that appendix map, not to be confused with the zoning map. Is there consensus to listen to the public and some of the concerns about open space and how much of a priority it is we do that?
Yes.
Consensus?
I'm fine with that.
Thumbs up.
All right, so.
Okay, and
I may add, so the idea was, in some place in the ordinance, it's probably best to put it in the section that governs the purposes of the districts. This is Article 5, so I'm in 5.1, scroll down to C, and you go down to C4 is the open space district, so there'd be a sentence or two added at the end saying something to the effect that open space zoning does not indicate ownership, and also it does not indicate, it is not an indication of someone's right to enter onto private property. And for reference on what is public and private, open space, please refer to Appendix 1, which will be this map that's attached. And the map would clearly say this is not the zoning map, it's for reference purposes, or something like that.
Yeah.
That is
Well, I would like to add, one of the volunteers for the zoning commission, was an outstanding group of people that put that together. We went over to the Wasco Sanitary District, the last meeting they had, and asked them how they would designate what we're calling open space, but the open space is actually where we're doing spray irrigation of effluent and the sewage lagoons. So on that appendix, we talked about putting it down as a public utility, which makes perfect sense. So I think that was a good addition.
Just for clarity. But I think the language that Mr. Brown's come up with in that section is where we would make the change. So
Okay.
there's one, I think Jen.
I just had a question, is this different from an overlay? And if so,
It is. Jim, get the legal aspect of that.
So this is not part of the zoning map, so it's not an overlay, which is, so you have an underlying zoning district, and then you have additional restrictions or allowances for certain parcels with, over that underlying zoning district. So you can have an overlay that includes 2 or 3 different zoning districts in the overlay of this. A good example of this, another community, they wanted an overlay to limit the area where cannabis dispensaries could go. And there were a couple of zoning districts in that, so they didn't want to make it blanket all B1 or all B2, so they just had an overlay district in this one little corner of town. It happened to be like B1, B2, B3. So that's where it was. So that's an overlay. So this is just a totally separate map. It's not a zoning map. This is just going to indicate the ownership, public, private access.
Independence.
Yeah. So just, we'll reference it, 1 or 2 places in the ordinance, and then we'll be in the back next to the zoning.
But to the extent that the expectations for those 2 areas might actually be different, it wouldn't be reflected in the zoning classification.
No, the zoning classification, we don't normally differentiate between, what, any type of ownership. It's whether it's
It's not a question of ownership, it's a question of use.
well, I mean, all zoning districts will have something to do with use.
And the end result, to your point on the utility designation on the open space, on the map it'll say that, but in open space on our zoning map, that affluent spray area is still gonna be open space because it's protected, it can't be built on, can't be changed in perpetuity, but on this, getting that another layer of ownership and what it's used for is in the open space map that we're attaching.
And that's why I'm just questioning whether, that's a very good example, in this utility area of the spray fields, whether or not the more formal overlay would be more appropriate than a reference in your appendix, for example.
Well, it's protected in the sense that it's labeled in the zoning map as open space, so by definition, you can't change that unless there's very specific ways to do that legally, but it's very difficult, it'd never be.
Oh, I get that, but the definition of open space said, it refers to passive and active recreation, indoor, outdoor, etc.
Not
And,
necessarily.
well, but it does in our definition, and so with this, I mean, it's certainly not our intention to build a recreational structure on the spray fields, right?
Well, as Administrator Rooney just mentioned, it's an area that just can't be built on. It's gonna be open space, whether it's used for spray irrigation, you can't build on sewage lagoons.
Well, we don't actually say you can't build on open space, you know.
No, there's a method that if it's part of, like the Forest Preserve has a need at a golf course, they have a way to build a golf clubhouse. Or they have some of their smaller facilities can be built on, and the township does that as well. But but the definition of open space, we have a provision of how they can build on it. Like at the Pocket Park in
That's right.
Fox Mill, there's a way they can put something on that under their control. They just can't make it a lot of subdivision that's built upon. And that's what we're truly trying to stop. We don't need an overlay district, and we don't recommend one. We recommend to hear people's concern and create this document.
Carmen, you have any comments?
But it seems like, I'm sorry, it seems like what you were attempting to do is simply clarify based on the meeting where people had, a lot of people got worked up a little bit over open space. And like, I'm a president of an HOA, and I have people in my subdivision saying, my God, you know, what does that mean as open space? We have, well, there's private open space, you know, and calm everybody down. I think you're just trying to clarify that portion, are you not?
Yeah.
So can we have a consensus to move forward on that?
No, fine.
Thumbs up?
I'm good.
Thumbs up? Okay,
Okay.
all right, well, move on.
The next item then is, under the generic barnyard animals and equines. There's been some discussion, did we wanna put a limit on the numbers, and chickens specifically, because a lot of lots with the square footage and the coops, you basically top out on the smaller lots in the village at 50. Some of the larger 4 acres, you could, you know, if you had the proper setbacks and your accessory dwelling units, you could probably get a higher number. But it couldn't, in any case, ever get to a commercial business, because it's not permitted in the use table to have any type of business where you're raising chickens for sale of their eggs or their meat. So that's the topic, but I think there's gonna be some discussion on that item.
Could we individualize the topics? In other words, you just talked about barnyard animals, equines, and chickens. You know, separate, listed separately. I'd like to go through each one individually.
I think that's possible, because there's a category for each one.
Yeah, great.
So I don't know which one you wanna, I mean, if you do barnyard is the one I listed first, and
That's
then
fine by me.
then we'll move down to chickens and roosters.
Yeah. All right, any comments on the barnyard animals and equines?
I'll let somebody else talk first.
I think Nick had his hand up.
Yeah, I figured I'd open because mine's pretty simple. I believe I was overall fairly satisfied with everything. But in 9.7A, shelter under barnyard animals, the second sentence, water and feed appropriate for the species of animals shall be readily. Oh, I'm sorry, page 67. Water and feed appropriate for the species of animals shall be readily available. My suggestion would be to strike that sentence. Really, I feel like that particular sentence is really overstepping kind of what our appropriate boundaries for our local government should be. We don't regulate that folks feed their dogs, take them for walks. I don't think we're going to enforce or check in on water and feed. I think it opens up the potential for folks who may not like animals that are next door, to give them an opportunity to consume a lot of the police department's time checking in on water and proper feed. I think folks who own animals, we're giving them overall the ability to have the freedom to have the appropriate amount of animals. I think we should also give them the ability to feed and water their animals. So that is my one suggestion in the animal section of the ordinance.
I would say if you struck that, it wouldn't preclude the county health department or the Humane Society from taking action if somebody's abusing an animal. That, it was there just to kind of, as an assurance belt suspenders that people wouldn't abuse their animals. But if they're abusing them, they're gonna fall under that kind of, we don't need that sentence to enforce that. So, is there a consensus to strike that one sentence?
Yes.
No, we're doing barnyards first.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I think this maybe is an oversight on the part of the zoning commission, because there was some discussion about the accumulation of manure and the storage thereof, and in relationship to chickens, there was clarity on the idea that, you know, covering your manure is not the best way to store it, and so the language for chickens was changed in 9.5A, paragraph 2, to say the accumulation of manure and dung shall not be offensive and must be managed to minimize any health hazards or nuisance. Manure and dung must be removed in a responsible manner on a regular basis, which seems great. That's for chickens. But when we move on to other animals, we have language that still talks about it being covered, I believe. So,
The zoning commission, trust me, they spoke at length on the excrement. Just trying to have a balance of telling people how they have to handle it based on the balance of nuisance, not creating a nuisance. So I think they did spend an appropriate amount of time, and they had someone that, on the 5-member commission, that raises horses.
but is there a reason to not use the same language about the accumulation of manure and dung not being offensive and being managed properly for all 3 categories of animals?
We could add that. It wouldn't be,
I mean,
it wouldn't take away from what's there now.
it seems inconsistent the way it's on, so.
Do we have go ahead, Ed.
I'm aware of an issue now in a equestrian neighborhood that has to do with the accumulation of horse manure, and that's the only one. So we were on barnyard first, but we're skipping the equines now. So equines is the only one that still says covered. Barnyard is substantially similar in the way it's written as the chickens is, as you read it. The only, I think, word is different is must be removed, not must be responsibly removed on a regular basis. So barnyards and chickens equivalent, equines are different. The issue with equines is, as I understand it from my previous work with the horse owners group and a lot of their owners, is that the volume, 50 pounds a day per animal average, and just the frequency of it necessitates a dumpster, is what most of them do. However, some of them don't, and it becomes an issue where are you putting all this stuff? And some are putting it on bridle paths and other places. And so the guidance to have it covered and removed basically is you should use a dumpster because you're living in a residential area. You can't be storing this stuff here. It's not like a farm where you can have a huge, dung heap, 3 or 4 horses or whatever. And so the consensus from previous was to keep that covered for horses and had it, consistently removed. It's the way that we understood it.
And that was kind of the point that Terry Lynn made as well. I think it was Terry Lynn.
Yes.
It was just, as you said, the volume, the apples, road apples are much bigger than chicken streets. So,
Yeah, so I think
that was the reasoning behind it. I mean, whether it's
if you want to,
correct,
if you think we
that's
need to
not-
strengthen that to
another thing.
force that issue, we can.
I think it's worded well.
I thought we did
didn't
it
like
right.
it last time the way it was worded. I don't think it's much reason that would leave it alone.
Okay. Do we have,
So, do we have consensus on
horses.
the manure excrement section? Now, other barnyard issues.
we'll take them together.
Okay,
Go ahead, Ed.
thanks. The first thing I would say is, we spent a lot of time in 2023 trying to get this right. Some of the comments by individuals saying that numbers are arbitrary or that, whatever other comments were honestly inaccurate. The fact that some people said we were being too restrictive or whatever else in the zoning also was inaccurate. The 2023 zoning for animals is the most liberal and least restrictive in Kane County, and if not all of northern Illinois. We worked very hard to make sure that things were generous, but also a good balance of having animals in residential areas. The horse owners that were involved, big thumbs up, they liked it, and they approved of it, and there have been no complaints about it since from the horse owners. So I don't know, first of all, why it needed to be changed. And I'd like to hear, other than hearing it's too restrictive or the numbers are arbitrary or whatever, which those are not true, and they've been been proven to be not true, I'd like to hear why it would need to be changed. And then the second comment, so to split it up, is, so now we can have alpacas, llamas, goats, ducks, geese, swans, and guinea fowl. But specifically removed were sheep, rabbits, guinea pigs, and turkeys. So, I mean, for people who didn't grow up in a suburban neighborhood, I did, but I found this out later, you know, a 4-H rabbit that a child grows to learn about animal husbandry and everything is not this big. It could be this big. A guinea pig is not this big. It's a large animal. But they're very popular for 4-H kids. Sheep also are one of the most popular animals for 4-H kids to learn about animals are sheep, rabbits, and guinea pigs. And we're saying, no, we can't have any of those. Although we could have had them in 2023, now we can't. So I don't know why that is. And I don't know why there's a distinction between, you can have an alpaca or a llama, and I see llamas I wouldn't want to get in a fight with, but I can't have a sheep, but I can have a goat. And some goats can be gigantic, but I can't have a sheep. So I don't know where that thinking was. And the last part was guinea fowl and peafowl are almost always listed together in a zoning ordinance as you can't have these because they are so noisy, it's ridiculous. Who had a guinea fowl back in? Why? So the specific animals is my second part. And the last part, I actually have on the specific animals. In 2023, we had a sentence that said, other generally well-accepted domesticated livestock animals not specifically permitted herein may be applied for with a special use permit application. The reason for that was pot-bellied pigs, other things we hadn't thought of, we're not experts, we don't know, was the ability for people to have something that maybe we didn't think of. And if they came to us and said, you know, I want to have something crazy, we'd probably say no. If something was, oh, I guess that's not bad, you know, the zoning commissioner or somebody else could opine on that. So I think there was more flexibility, there was a better representation of animals in 2023. But again, I go back to, why do we need to change it? So those are my questions.
Well, first, I think rabbits are allowed. I don't think it falls under a certain definition. The intention was not to regulate rabbits at all. And I'll just say for the record, I grew up in the 1960s in a town that was full of Slovak and Eastern European immigrants, and I grew up with all my neighbors having chicken coops, goats, pigs, everything was there. So, I mean, I grew up with rabbits. I never saw a rabbit that big, but maybe they get that big. The guinea fowl, that was an all-inclusive list that I prepared with the idea that, you know, I throw this at, there's something that someone wants to delete, it's easier to do that than to add it in. So that either just went under the rug or no one raised an objection to it. In general, for the horse, the question on the horses, removing those numbers, there was...
What was the question? Sorry.
I think your first question was on the horses and why I think you were getting at why were the numbers.
No, the first question, to be clear, is we had the equines and we had barnyard animals, what we call smaller animals.
Yeah.
So why did a small animal, and you could get one lump together, why did the 23 zoning for large and small animals, why did that need to be changed completely to be this?
You mean just the categories? Or you mean
the zoning description, everything in these sections, there are multiple changes. Well, first of all, let me ask, will you admit that there have been multiple changes from 2023 to 2024 when it comes to what we permit for equines and what you're calling now barnyard animals?
Oh, yes.
Okay, there's been multiple changes. Okay,
And I think
what necessitated, why did we need to make those changes in the no limit on animals, and you can have them on smaller lots, and we specifically removed, and you may say rabbits are not, and you didn't intend to remove them, but they're not on the permitted list anymore, and they were before.
Mm-hmm.
So that legally, I would assume, tells me they've been removed. So that's my question, why all the changes?
Oh, I don't know if I can
I
summarize.
think in a general sense, they took barnyard to be like Lochitis as a farm. Barnyard animals that are raised commercially were put in that category, and then everything, equines were different, and then all the other full list of everything from pot-bellied pigs to small goats to big goats, llamas were not a commercial animal, and people raised sheep, hogs, and cattle, and milk cows commercially. That was kind of like only on the farmland.
No, that's not accurate, I'm sorry. But
Well, that was the intent.
Well, it clearly it's not the intent, because we're allowing barnyard animals on R1 now. So we said they were the farm animals we didn't want, but we put them on the smaller lots?
No, I don't think we have hogs or cattle of any kind.
No, the
Or sheep.
definition of barnyard animals, when I'm saying that, those are the things that are permitted. And they are permitted down to R1. It's on page 64, and then barnyard animals are defined on page 67, 9.7. These are not defined, they're just discussed.
I'm looking for something else.
Jim, did you have a comment?
Well, yeah, I mean, just, I don't want to interrupt Adam, but I just wanted to kind of get in the same debate in terms of why the changes. I mean, my big takeaway on the changes was we didn't want to count animals, okay? But every community around us counts animals. And I guess what I'm struggling with, and you guys, I mean, you know, I want to build consensus. I want us to all get on the same side. But to go from what we had in 2023 on this particular topic that is raised in terms of barnyard animals to on a small residential lot, I can have 6 llamas. That's craziness. That makes no sense to me. Or I can have whatever. That's illogical to me. When I think of some small lots in a residential area, you're gonna. Well, that's an important question.
Yeah.
How big is an R1?
10,000 square feet.
0.62,
Oh, it's less than
Yeah.
that.
right.
0.62 acres to 1.24. 0.62 acres to 1.24.
Correct. And if you notice, the last time when we went through this was laborious. I happened to be a member of the board at that time. It was laborious, only because we were trying to listen to everybody's feedback and try to do the right thing. And I know one of our members, called him doctor because he has a PhD, he tried everything in terms of size, how much excrement do the animals put out. And one of the things, as you can see, is on the page 17 of what you gave us, which I thought was very useful. You show what was in 2023 and what's in the current draft. You can see that we said it had to be at least 1.25 acres. So I remember that debate. I'm sure Ed remembers it too. We wanted to have some type of a limit. But here, we've opened it up to as many as you want, to a small lot that you basically have. And that's illogical to me, when the world around us is not that way. And my fear isn't today. It isn't, because no one's complaining, right? So, okay, but what happens tomorrow? When I'm living next to a guy that shows up with 10 goats on that small lot next to me,
Nobody wants
and I call the village, how do we resolve that issue? Well, if you tell me to go to adjudication, they're gonna say, well, the zoning says he can have as many goats as he wants. And I'm just fearful that we're opening up a huge Pandora's box and potentially creating a Hatfields and a McCoy's situation from neighbor to neighbor. And I just think it's crazy. I mean, I'm all for openness and for trying to understand it, but based on what I read for the rationale, I'm not there.
So,
I think Jim's gonna respond to Jim.
to both. So this is a little bit of the thinking of the commission, and what they were trying to do. So they're trying to formulate regulations that would be, as open or least restrictive as possible. And they had 4 major considerations. They're up on this slide. So they wanted to ensure the health of the animals, and they felt that other agencies play a role in that. In a lot of instances, current staff or future staff would not have the expertise. It would be someone like a state or county veterinarian consultant going out and having to do that. Secondly, they wanted to ensure that nuisances were eliminated or mitigated. And they felt that the generally relatively large lot sizes, location standards, and our nuisance codes would cover that. Third, there was concern over mitigating environmental damage. Again, they felt that there were other agencies involved in doing that, and we have the nuisance code to back us up. And I think fourth and finally, there was just a belief that owners are generally responsible, and particularly with the keeping of animals. I gave an example at one of the meetings. Just because people can do something, they can maximize something, you rarely find that in my experience. And the example I gave was in a community I worked in, you could build 2.5-story houses, and yet there were blocks and blocks and blocks of homes that had been built in the late 1940s that were 1 story. And over multiple owners, and even with the demand for space, no one had decided, oh, I can build up, well, let me go build it just because I can do it. I mean, there had to be a big need there, or obviously it's a great expense. It would be the same with the keeping of horses. That's a great expense. And if someone did extend and just had too many horses on their property, then they would probably run afoul of some other things, like the smell, the nuisance, the way they house the animals, and there would be other ways that we could combat it. So there was a general idea to remove the limitations on all the animals. So that's how we got to that point.
I think Jan's next.
I appreciate the concern raised by Trustee Muncy and Trustee McKelvey, but I'm not surprised because this has been, fairly relentless campaign, against the lifting of numerical restrictions on animals. So I'm not surprised that it continues to today. The simple fact of the matter is, if we were to call the question on this issue right now, there is not a consensus to go back to the 2023 mechanism. And so we can talk about how or why or whatever, but I don't think you're going to get 4 votes to go back to the 2023 way. And so I think that's where it's at.
I think we're still presenting it.
Is it a consensus to change what the zoning commission has recommended? Because I don't think it is.
I don't think we're done presenting our information that we want to present on this issue.
Do you have more than that?
Yes, yes, I
Okay.
do. So,
I thought it started with some questions, and the questions seem to have been answered. So
I'm not allowed to have more, I'm not allowed to have more
I just
comments.
thought you would like them all out at once.
Well, it's kind of hard to get the 2 answers first. This is becoming not the kind of exchange that should happen at the board level, so let's stop that. It's not a direct, person against person exchange or attack. What it is I was elected to represent all of the residents of the village in the way that I believe that they want to be represented. And that's exactly what I'm doing. It's not personal for me. So what I believe the residents want is, number one, what we did in 2023 again was heralded and was the horse owner community liked it because it did not put the onus on them. Let me go back to that in the nuisance ordinance, where this will come into play on all of the animals, whether it's barnyard. I'll wait till everybody can hear me. Whether it's barnyard, equines, or chickens. If we stand solely on a nuisance ordinance, you are putting the onus, the responsibility on a resident to complain, and that resident then must bring that up in front of the adjudicator and or a judge to be able to say, this is why I feel that it is a nuisance to me. And that adjudicator or judge is going to have to determine whether or not they agree with that, and they're going to have to look at village code and village ordinances to determine whether or not that's supported. You're putting it all on the resident to do this, and goes neighbor against neighbor, versus why do we have an ordinance about how tall grass can be? I don't know, it's 8 or 9 inches or something, whatever it is.
10.
Thank you. So 10 inches. So why do we have that? It's because there's a cutoff where we can finally say, as a resident, look, someone's not maintaining their property at all. My municipality, please step in and take care of this, because that's what we expect from our municipality. And then our municipality can step in and take care of that as a code or ordinance violation, saying, you can't have grass that long. It's the city or village of XYZ saying to this resident, you can't do that. Not this resident versus this resident. So that's the problem I have with have as many animals as you want, as long as it's not a nuisance, but if it's a nuisance, our nuisance ordinance will take care of it. No, that means neighbor has to step up, identify, and say, I don't want this other neighbor doing this, I'm willing to stand in front of somebody, I'm willing to start this Hatfield McCoy situation between neighbors in the neighborhood. It's not, our municipality is not living up to its responsibility to protect its residents in this situation. Therefore, again, I think, and I don't know that there's consensus to go back or not to go back. I don't see the detriment of the 2023 ordinance. I thought it was good. I still do. And I haven't heard any arguments why it was bad, other than we want more animals and we think people will be fine. But I think I've made a pretty strong argument why relying on the nuisance ordinance is not good for our residents, and I think our municipality should do better and should uphold their responsibility more.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'll generally comment on this whole ordinance and then kind of drill into this, but one thing I noticed while going through this for as long as I have is that generally the village has tended to loosen its restrictions and really kind of lengthen the weeds on homeowners and residents. I think that horse owners, animal owners, chicken owners, all of the above, generally speaking, we really need to write our regulations and our policy for the majority, not the anomaly. Animal owners are typically very responsible. They're going to have the correct number of animals that they can take care of. They have the animals for a reason. Again, I really see this as the government overstepping when it's extending its arm into people's yards, telling them what they can and can't do. In the smaller properties, the R1s, R2s, 3s, 4s, that's all going to drill down into the HOAs. In R4 and R3, the R2s, there's no horses, no barnyard animals. We get up into close to 3/4 of an acre before we're even talking about barnyard animals. And the fact is, why do we want to be involved in how many animals people have on their property? Again, why do we want to be involved in regulating this? The animal owners, these are adults. Let adults be adults. Get the number of animals that you feel you can take care of. And I really commend the village for recommending to not have a matrix of numbers on any animals whatsoever outside of where it's not permitted at all. That would be my comment.
All right. Well, we could discuss this all night. What if we take consensus on going back to the 2023, the ordinance, the keeping of animals with numbers, or consensus on no number of animals?
Can I rephrase that question? And the question would be this,
Yeah.
is the consensus there should be no limit on the number of animals in our zoning, or have some limit? Because that's in essence what this is, there's no limit.
Well, but the numbers are up there, and that's why.
I was just,
Well, let Tom Williams, wanted to speak. Go.
That's the question I'm asking. So, real quick, to be clear, just maybe because I'm not catching it, on the smallest piece of property that you can have as many animals as you want, what is that number? What's the smallest acreage you can have as many animals as you want?
That's when you get into these animals, that's 30,000 square feet. Almost 3/4.
Three-quarters of an acre, okay, just want to clarify, okay. And so, can I ask a question to that though, real quick, too, just directly? Are you saying go back to those numbers, or you're saying you're talking about a limit? I guess is what I'm saying.
I think there should be a limit, yes. I prefer, I think the limit I think the limit was good in 2023. I could have been convinced of other numbers, sure, but I think there should be a number. So, as Jim put it, I think the question really is, do we want a limit on number of animals, or do we not want one, as is being proposed currently?
We're gonna put up section 9, what is it, 9?
I'm looking for
9-2, what page number is that? Page 64, under the current proposed ordinance, if you look at that, that's got the lots on permitted, not permitted. Yeah, that's the 20, that's the 24 that's being proposed. Page 64.
There's a chart in the, Mark, what were you saying?
Page 64 kind of shows.
64, what document?
The proposed ordinance.
This is on keeping of animals.
Yes. That's what the proposed ordinance has now, instead of that number that we had up before.
Yeah, it's either permitted or not permitted.
And the size of the lot and what they have as their accessory dwelling unit doesn't weigh back into a limit. It just doesn't have a straight numerical limit. There is, it's not fair to say there's no limitation, because the size of your lot, your accessory dwelling unit, and your setbacks from, and if you've got bees and chickens and then something else, your lot is gonna squeeze down to the point that it would restrict how many animals you could have. But it's not a numerical chart. It's based on what you put in your back of the setback of your dwelling unit. It's not no limit, but it's based on how many different types of animals and stuff that you have. You can't use the same space twice. Unless it's bees. They have their spot, they don't need a large footprint other than their hive.
One last comment, and then we'll have to move
I
on.
think the question that we're asking for consensus for is possibly not correct. Question really is, do we have consensus on accepting the recommendation of the zoning commission, which was well considered, and I'm, again, not surprised but dismayed that we have a minority of trustees trying to undo this work that has gone on for the better part of the year, with the keeping of animals being a key aspect of that work. So I don't believe there's a consensus for not accepting the recommendation of the zoning commission, and that's the question that I would like to pose right now.
I'd like to, again, this is probably a point of order, I'd like to caution us as a board in using inflammatory and dramatic language in saying things like dismayed, that some trustees have a difference of opinion. Yes, there was a group that worked on this for over 9 years, and they came up with something. There's a group that's since worked on it for over a year, they came up with something. Because we don't necessarily agree with each other, it's not vehement opposition, it's not dismaying, it's us doing our jobs. So we are all trying to do our jobs to the best of what we feel we should do. So let's stop with the language that kind of puts people against each other. It's unnecessary, and it's not something that should happen at the board level.
And Mike wants to be heard, if he can be recognized. Go ahead, Mike, I'll put it on and put it up to the mic. Go ahead. I'm gonna put you on there, now do it.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I think, Mark, there is a number already. We need to clarify the number. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this table, but it should have, if we know what we're talking about by square footage, one unit, we just said there's a number. So it
The issue, I think, though, it doesn't, like, as we said, if you had chicken plus this plus that, there'd be a limitation. But it's based on, the current way it's written, it's based on what your individually, your lots layout and setbacks. If you have a pie-shaped lot, you're gonna get a lot less animals of any kind versus a square way on it. So it's hard for us to put a number in the current zoning ordinance the way it's proposed.
We're not looking for any possible numbers, but I'm hearing from the board,
Your background noise is kicking in like it.
I'm moving away. I was standing by myself and keep hearing. We can assume on a typical, let's say, Fox Mill lot. Let's say, this much, roughly around this type of lot, this is based on the calculations, just so you know, we're talking about this would be 30 chickens, this would be 90 chickens, this would be 150. So that folks that are unsure or concerned or like interested in what's the point where the neighbor shouldn't make, if the number of X-houses that you can have based on this 20, the number of other problem. So that's just down there. And then you make a caveat that it's exclusive to this type of animal. If you choose not to have this type of animal, the calculations would produce one. We can do this we have standards in the zoning ordinance to show what a typical lot could look like, show for clarity purposes what setbacks look like, show in the buildable area of lot. Do this for the same thing. It's just, I think, like I said, hopefully found out some folks that are scared or nervous. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. So are you in favor of modifying the zoning proposed ordinance? Or?
I don't think the concept, I'm fine with the concept, I don't modify the concept, I think we want to put it as a point of clarification. Like I said, we have a bunch of other things that there are clarifying it, that describe, when we say this setback, here's an example of how we're going to calculate it. Okay? So here's how we're going to calculate the number of chickens. So when we go to have this thing published, we have a number in there that says, based on these factors, we have these three numbers.
Is it for Mike or? Okay.
Go.
Are you thinking of this as an illustration? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Okay, and then Jim,
No, I'm fine, yes.
you're good?
Yep.
Tom? Go.
Can I ask a question, Mike? Mike, are you gonna be here next week?
Yes.
Okay. Can I make a motion to push this in the next week? I don't know what he's saying. I don't completely understand what he's saying. And I'm sorry, I'd like to hear it clearer. I think you kind of feel the same. Would you agree with me a little bit? I just want to hear what he's saying. He was the one that worked on this, and I want to be clear that this is set before we move on. Is that a way of moving past this question and jumping on to come up with some of the other ones, maybe we can consensus on, but I'd like to hear what he's saying. I can't really hear what he's saying.
I'm good with that.
That's a good idea, Tom.
I'm good with that.
All right, consensus for that? To move on? Wait to the next meeting?
Yeah, and Carmen, maybe you can specify after they discuss it further, even if we list this as action next meeting, they could discuss and edit it at that meeting if they want to put in numbers. Right?
Right.
So we'll have it, you've got the current code that's being proposed, the zoning, that doesn't have numerical limits. And it's, we'll work on an illustrative example, but it's not gonna be as exact as a chart that was, number 17 that you had in the 2023. That's been removed, and you have to back into a number of each animal based on what somebody has as a lot size and how many different animals they have on that lot. So I don't know if that'll ever answer what Trustee Muncie's saying is he'd like to go back to an absolute chart of this many animals of this size for the lot sizes that are listed in that former chart. So you can you'll just be deferring this and then coming to a consensus on what to do with that item next Tuesday night.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I think, when I look at this list, I think, first of all, it was passed to us unanimously, right? From zoning board. I think this is probably, what I'm seeing here is different opinions. I think Mike not being here is we had a meeting short people last week. We have a meeting short person this week. And I just want to nip this in the bud and get consensus. I'd love to see unity completely on this subject. So that's kind of why I'm making a motion to move it into next week and kind of get on some things. We had a couple things off the list that we went, okay, boom, 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 that's good.
But just as a point, the zoning ordinance that you're reviewing is a full document, and you're talking about modifying a piece or a page or section of before you pass a vote on the entire document.
Yes.
So it's going to take
Yes.
4 trustees to modify what the ordinance before you is. So keep that in mind to talk amongst yourselves between now and Tuesday night.
Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment on that, and I agree with what you said, but generally speaking, probably the U.S. Congress is not a good example to use, but I'll use it anyways. Because generally when you have what I would call a large piece of legislation that comes before whatever body, Senate, the House, in this case, a small village board, you do want to build consensus, and you do want to try to have such a large piece be unanimous. And the last time the board had this come from the committee and had to go, we went back and forth to try to find that common ground, okay? And that should be our goal. So, and again, I'm not personally objecting to what Trustee Burson said, but to say that 2024 has to be accepted in its entirety, I disagree with. I think we have to try to find that common ground to get this thing across the finish line. Because I think we all want that. I want that.
Absolutely.
I want this thing passed. But to write off others' comments as somehow we've got some, I don't know, past history that we're falling on a sword for 2023 is not accurate.
Well, and I think what Tom is saying is he wants that unanimity, and he wants Mike to be here in person. So
Absolutely.
there's no disagreement. So we'll just take this section and hold it in abeyance until next Tuesday night, when hopefully all 7 are here in person to try to get to a consensus. Because it doesn't look like we can get to one tonight.
It's applying to barnyard animals, equines, and chickens, because there's a lot of stuff with chickens too.
Yeah, or I suspect, I guess you could have do you want to restrict roosters or let roosters stay as a chicken, Mike?
I still am not 100% sure on that one. I mean, I know nobody would have all roosters as in served. But I mean, there is a possibility, so maybe it's a percentage of maximum of 1 rooster per 5 hens, or 1 rooster per 10 hens, something along those lines.
We'll push that to the next
Go
meeting.
ahead.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you research?
Go ahead. So we'll talk all 3 items on animals till next Tuesday night.
Sounds good.
And then the next item would be the table of permitted and special uses. I think that there was some question, and I'd like to recognize Jim Brown, because as we were looking at this, as we got some feedback from some of the trustees, we did feel like we had an oversight on, and Jim, if you can pull that up.
Tell us what page it's on.
Page number would be 37.
Thank you.
I know that there's been a desire of this board and the zoning commission to try to restrict bringing of and creating commercial yards or landscape yards on farm properties. because that's, and we thought we kind of put some restrictions on that in the use table, but Jim and I, when we were looking at some other things, I said, are we absolutely sure that we are precluding someone buying, whether it's 10 acres or 50 or 100 acres, and then putting a, essentially what's an industrial park and neighbors to the east of the river, Fox, out here, where they think they can get away with creating a commercial yard. And I thought we did in the zoning deliberations, but Jim and I found one area that we would recommend tightening that aspect. So Jim, if you
Yeah,
show us that.
I'm trying to find it now. It's, it was the contractor yard.
Contractor yard, yes.
Yeah, so here it is.
This is what page now?
On the transportation logistics,
In construction.
on page 38,
Page
first line.
38 and 5.
So this is the, this is perhaps a little easier, it's the original Excel spreadsheet. It did not convert too well to PDF, that's why I'm bringing this up. The resolution wasn't that high. So, this was the two issues in question were contractor office. So if someone has a bona fide construction business and they're running administration out of there, they have a building and maybe a garage is one thing, and then the other is just people looking to park a bunch of landscaping trailers. Their business is someplace else and they don't have room to accommodate all of their equipment, and they just want an open field. So that's why this was broken up into two different categories. And here we see down at the end in contractor yard, if I scroll up here, these columns are RD and farm business, that's that overlay. Right now on the zoning map, we have only one entity, that's the Wasco Nurseries, that's farm business. So we'd have to add that overlay to an existing farm zone property. But it would be a permitted use then. I'm not really sure in that column M, which is FB, I'm not really sure that either of those should be a permitted use or even allowed at all. Our contractor man is shaking his head.
No, I understand. And I looked at that and I said, I think we made a mistake.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was in that business, and I'll be honest with you, I mean, my dad was a contractor, I sold the contractors, the one thing they are all looking for, every one of them, is to get rid of, they're looking for open yards. I used to rent yards, I had 150 open yards in a municipal thing in Carroll Stream, that was permanent the correct way. So I had 150 people in about 10 minutes that wanted to rent from me. And they will come, if you open it up and keep it wide open, and you're going to see skid steers and backhoes, and it's gonna, I mean, they're all wishing they could work out of their house because it's hard to find. Go to DuPage County, go to DeKalb County and say, I wanna, you know, if I said, hey, I wanted to put a contractor's yard in, unless you're Home Depot or Menards, you can be as ugly as you want, by the way, because those guys generate sales tax. Contractors do not generate sales tax, so no one wants them. And I'm telling you, if you open it up, it's gonna be like word of mouth, and they'll be here, and it'll be over. And it'll look just, you know, and people say they won't come, oh, they will come. Because I've got a lot of contractors in my neighborhood, actually, and that's their office, you would never know. And, you know, I just walked up to them and I said, hey, we're looking at this. They said, you're not gonna open this neighborhood up, I mean, this community up for yards, are you? And they were asking me who they wanted to know, because they wanted to move here.
Right. Well, that's what, when I went back and looked at this, I think we're leaving a crack of the door to do that. So I wanted to highlight that and recommend that you do make a modification to either make it a special use and you put all kinds of restrictions on it, or you just do a blanket, change the P to a line and it's not permitted.
Okay, what's the consensus?
Not permitted.
Not permitted.
Not permitted.
For both of those entities, the contractor office with equipment and contractor.
When you're saying equipment, are you talking like office equipment, or you're just saying equipment?
No, I mean like a backhoe or whatever it is, a trailer.
I would take that all off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not permitted, all right. Good,
No one vote.
okay.
Okay.
No one goes,
Now, we would open up to trustees that have an issue with any of the lines that have permissions or special uses.
And then tell us which topic it is, so we can put it on the screen for the public.
So where are you? Six still?
Yes,
Okay.
the newspaper.
Mm-hmm. All right. Janet, go ahead.
I have proposed a series of changes to sections 7.1, 7.2, 8.1, and 8.4. I grouped them together because they're all various different use aspects.
And I believe that there are a few folks on the table.
So they're on the handout that says proposed amendment number 3, the zoning ordinance.
Name those again. We started out 7.2.
7.1,
7.1.
7.2, 8.1, and 8.4. So, referring to the document that I handed out to everyone, in table 7.1, we have a variety of uses, right? And so, one of the ones that we have we've got some that we've excluded here. Not sure why we're excluding cannabis dispensaries in 2024. I'm also unsure about why we would not allow a pharmacy or a drugstore in an RD, in a retail district. And I think Jim Brown had also brought up at a previous meeting there appeared to be a restriction against tobacconists that was possibly confused with hookah parlors and vaping places and so forth, which is not something that we're interested in. But I don't know if there's any reason why someone was selling pipe tobacco or something here in Campton Hills that we would want to restrict that. Those were the ones under the first group under 7.1.
Would trustee Burson allow us to go through this step by step? It might be easier to
Yeah,
get
I
consensus.
think that
Well, we can
is-
certainly go through that first group. Why don't we start there? Yeah.
So I have a comment first. RD stands for Research and Development District, not Retail District. So, first of all, allowing a pharmacy or drugstore in the Research and Development District just isn't consistent. It's already in the Commercial District, which is where retail would be. The cannabis business, I don't know if we had a referendum that voted that down. I believe we did. I don't know if we had one legally to vote it up. Again, I recall.
We didn't, and we don't need to.
Thank you, trustee Burson. I don't know that it's, I mean, if the board wants to take this on now, decide if we want to have cannabis dispensaries, I guess that's what you're suggesting, trustee Burson. I think that's.
I'm suggesting there isn't any reason to restrict it.
That's your opinion. Yes,
Let's
that's
take
it.
a consensus on that.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to speak, Tom?
Did you guys were telling me, once again, did the board pass something against it? I mean, you're acting like there was something against it before.
The board did not approve it in the past. Okay, and it was based on referendum. Well, most communities a few years back, when it became legal in the state of Illinois, communities did take some by just a board vote, or they did do non-binding referendums on that issue. I do not know if there was an actual referendum here. I think it was a.
Video game.
My understanding was there was an ordinance that specifically said it would not be permitted, and then adding it to the zoning ordinance.
But there was not a referendum. That was on gaming.
No, it was on cannabis, my recollection. I could be wrong.
I think it's just the vote of the board at the time.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, the zoning ordinance specifically says that it's not allowed, which is obviously prevented. And when it did become legal versus in a medical standpoint, and then from a recreational standpoint, if it wasn't in the zoning ordinance, then the understanding that there could be interpretation that it could be permitted or allowed. So if
I
communities
have the
wanted it,
ordinance number if you'd like it.
if the community did want to prohibit it, then they would obviously pass an ordinance specifically stating that it would not be allowed. But under the zoning ordinance.
So let's tackle the cannabis first, and with cannabis, I would include a smoke shop. So we'll take a consensus on that.
As a permitted use.
No,
A smoke
as
shop
a no
and-
use.
a smoke shop and a cannabis dispensary are not the same thing.
But
Separated, I think.
keep them separate?
Yeah.
They're under 7.1. Okay.
But I think the topic of cannabis is.
They're separate lines though,
Okay. So cannabis consensus.
as a dispensary.
To add it back in as a permitted use.
No. Yes.
Does anybody want to add it back? There's one person that's proposing to add it. Is there a second, third, fourth?
first time to kind of process, I'm trying to figure out what the negative is. But why was it not permitted? Is there an argument to not have a cannabis dispensary? I mean, what is the argument against it? I mean, other cities aren't having trouble with them. I haven't noticed like anything in the news negative about having them. I'm trying to figure out what it is.
You know, I guess my only argument, if I could have one against it, is there's a million. I mean, I know there's that, like, gas stations are the same way, okay? And we do restrict how many commercial things are done here. So I kind of look at it like, why? I mean, I can drive, there's a new one opening up every week in every town. I can drive a mile to get to one. Do I need another one? I don't know. I don't think there needs to be as many of those as there is gas stations. So I wonder if I really care enough to have it here. But that would be my argument against it, I guess.
I would just say the same thing about liquor stores. I mean, we have several different venues to buy liquor. I don't see what the argument is against it, and I'd like to hear that. It's a pretty quick discussion.
Well, we just need a consensus on cannabis. Who's in favor, who's in not in favor? Consensus?
Who wants to add, legally put cannabis in a zoning district? I don't.
At this point, I would be for it.
Ed?
I do not.
Jim? Yeah, Jim.
I
Ed?
do not, no.
No. And then Janet?
Yes.
So the noes have it.
Mr. Millette? Yeah. Mike, are you still, do you want to add, do you want to allow cannabis to be a permitted use?
Will it still require special use?
We haven't decided that. It could be a special use. Would you vote yes if it was a special use?
I would allow it as a special use, yes, but not by right.
I know that was a choice.
That's fair.
Well, he's making a third option.
Well, guess what? I like his idea. By special use, I think, would they have to ask, is it?
In the commercial districts, 1 and 2?
Yes. That's, it's like we talked about in the task we had here.
Because you can put restrictions and conditions in a special use.
I don't like that.
In C1 and C2.
Yes, you want to see two, okay?
So if it is allowed, I'm not sure that I know of a community that has it as a permitted use. Typically, any of the cannabis business establishments, whether they're growers, transporters, dispensaries, they're all special use.
Yes.
They're all limited to specific districts. And yes, one of the steps would be to include it in the use matrix, but there would also be significant amount of text that would have to go into the zoning ordinance as well, relating to the restrictions in the special use process. So they're mostly pretty standard, but some communities do change them. So it wouldn't just be as simple as putting just the S in the use matrix.
Well, we could bring those for next Tuesday if you decide to put it in.
Or another time.
Is there, I guess you need to take a consensus for special use in the C1, C2? Or do you just want it one, not the other?
So,
I'm gonna say special use on board.
special use?
I'm still a no.
You're still a no?
I'm a no.
You're a no. So 2 yeses, 2 noes, and then
And Mike was special use, yes.
special use, yes. Janet is, yes.
So there's 3 yeses. No, 4 yeses. 4 yeses for special use.
Okay.
And you don't have to vote because there's already 4. All right, so Carmen will bring us language that he will largely adopt from a very, a client that's already done this.
I will give it some significant thought and work. I can't guarantee that I can have language by tomorrow for Tuesday. It's a very significant.
But it'll be for Tuesday night, you can
I can work with Jim.
Yeah.
Yes. This isn't as simple as just changing a setback. So this is something very significant. So.
And,
All right.
what's in 7.1 is also tobacconist, which is a smoke shop. Do you want to talk about that?
And it's not a smoke shop, it's someone selling tobacco.
Somebody selling tobacco?
Yeah, I have, if I may, so I have highlighted, there's again 2 categories here, we broke this out, there's the highlighted in yellow up there, smoking, hookah, or vaping, lounge. And then there's the tobacconist. The tobacco is just strictly retail products, so cigarette lighters, cigars, cigarettes. We sell tobacco in town. In town, I've walked to the Shell gas station, one entire wall of cigarettes, so. It's a source of retail. It would be allowed in our 2 retail districts. Specifically excludes, that definition specifically excludes smoking on the premises. Smoking, inhaling, language is prohibited there. But the other kind of smoking lounge is prohibited across the board.
Okay.
Question on the definition, just to be clear. I know the use of tobacco on the premises is not, according to Mr. Brown, not allowed in a tobacconist, but a tobacconist is any type of tobacco, whether it's, pipe tobacco in a bag, or it's cigarettes, or it's cigars, or it's vaping. I mean, it could be just a vaping store, correct? Not with use on site, but it's just selling vaping materials and glass.
They sell vaping
lighters, whatever.
materials at gas stations.
But I understand, but for a tobacconist, I just want to make sure I understand the definition. It could just be a vape store, it could just be a high-class or high-end cigar store, or it could be all of the above. Is that correct?
Let me take a look. Because I think there is language that would prohibit some of the items you're suggesting.
Yeah, I thought they didn't want pure vaping store when they discussed it at the zoning
And you
commission.
just off the bat, we go quicker.
Do you want the definition of tobacconist?
Hang on, I'll throw it up on the board, I guess.
139.
Thanks, and then we'll see. So, yeah, an establishment for the retail sale of tobacco
Related
and
products.
related products.
So there's no limitation on one time.
Well, it'd have to be like a cigarette lighter or a cigar or a tobacco product.
Vaping is not a tobacco product.
I don't think so, no.
I think that was what they defined. Vaping is not a tobacco product. It's a substitute for that product in usual parlance. So that's why the vaping store, they said they wouldn't be saying yes.
Yeah. I'd be more comfortable if we were to add something to clarify that this does not include, establishments primarily for how we technically call vaping stores. I prefer that we not just have vaping stores. The other ones, if it's all inclusive, whatever, and it's a retail establishment, it's fine.
So put that as a special use as well? And
But I think trustee person may have an idea too.
I agree with trustee Muncy on the concern about, what tobacconist might be defined as. Could it be as simple as just removing and related products? I don't think we need to reference the fact that they might be selling lighters or something. That's generally allowed in retail anyway. So, can't we just say tobacco products?
I think
Yeah.
the issue is the vaping is not generally viewed as it's a substitute for tobacco. It's not tobacco. They're not burning tobacco in a vape.
Do you feel that, Mr. Brown, you feel you could force that the way it's written now? 'Cause I don't understand.
Right, so I'm looking now at the definition for smoking, hookah, or vaping lounge, so it'd have to be similar language, only prohibiting it. So, hookah lounge, for example, would be an establishment for smoking. Smoke or smoking means inhaling or exhaling the fumes, and this is the part we'd have to somehow mimic or change, of any organic or synthetic material, including, but not limited to, plants, herbs. We obviously allow tobacco because it's tobacco, so it'd be something like that. That would not include that, some other type of product. That'd just be 1 or 2 sentences added on to the tobacco.
I don't wanna get into the weeds.
No pun intended.
No, but if you wanna,
Yeah,
if you
part of
wanna
one.
specifically allow vaping,
My personal preference would be to have language in there to specifically exclude vaping.
Sure, yeah,
I agree.
all right.
all right, so that covers tobacconists. Did we cover that section then?
yeah.
Because the
Seven.
pharmacy, drugstore,
So,
C1, C2.
continue down in that section, and accepting trustee Muncie's correction on the RD, district, through in the entire column.
Where are you now?
I'm still in section 7.1, a little further down on the table, where massage therapy establishments, personal service establishments, and physical therapy establishments. We seem to have excluded these, I'm not sure why. And when we say, for example, physical therapy establishment, do we mean a place that only does physical therapy, or do we mean one of the many businesses that we already have in the village that happen to provide physical therapy as part of their medical services? So I would suggest that we allow massage therapy, personal services, and which would be spa services and things like this, and physical therapy services in C1 and C2 districts.
And Jim, did they say they were gonna allow that as part of a medical health facility?
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to figure out where this is now, but I think we did acknowledge that they exist here in the village presently, and that they should be allowed, and I can't find it off the top of my head, but if they were licensed by the state to,
Physical therapists are doctors of physical therapy these days. If one of them wants to open a physical therapy only establishment, they should be able to do that without being under the aegis of a chiropractor or something. Just as a licensed massage therapist should be able to open an office to do that. They're licensed by the state to do that.
Yeah, I kind of remember the zoning commission wanting to say yes to those.
They're allowed in the matrix, it's just that they're C, they're conditional for, I mean, they're allowed in all commercial districts, these three uses, but for some reason massage therapy is a conditional and physical therapy is a conditional, but I can't find what the condition is.
I couldn't either.
So did we just change those in the chart to be a P, as you're suggesting, to cover that, Jim? Right.
right, but I think they would already be covered. There's three definitions: physical therapist, physical therapy center, and then defining physical therapy. The physical therapy definition comes from state statute, I believe.
So they didn't want to restrict it.
Right, so as long as they have first of all, if it's something supposed to be licensed by the state, they hold that license, then it would be allowed.
So would we just change and edit this back to put P in the C1 and C2 for those three items in that use table? Is there a consensus to do that? Everybody's nodding their head, so
Yeah.
we'll just put it down as a script.
As a P.
Yep.
Okay, moving along at 7.2.
Continuing on,
If I could just, for 1 second, Jim, if I recall correctly, that there was discussion about the potential nuisance aspects to massage therapy establishments. And then in a lot of communities, there are, let's say, strict licensing guidelines, background checks.
what would those nuisance aspects be? I'm a licensed massage therapist, and I find this entire notion personally and professionally offensive.
I think Carmen's got the floor right now.
And my experience in the subject relates to typically standalone establishments of more of a transient nature, and with the perceived or often experienced interrelation with human trafficking.
I'm aware of that, and having operated in another suburb that decided that they needed to regulate this heavily in a way that I don't think that we would typically want to do, that included very scary posters that the proprietor was required to display, warning all the clients that this site may be involved in human trafficking, and requiring, as you say, background checks on all of the employees and so forth, was a slap in the face and an obstacle to all the legitimate operators, and the illegitimate operators were easy to see and easy to shut down and didn't require any of this. It was very simple to walk for anyone enforcing ordinances to walk into one of these locations and know what was going on. So I think that the notion that massage therapy is more associated with human trafficking than countless other occupations is ill-informed.
And I understand that, and I don't think I made a statement that all massage therapy is attributed to human trafficking. several adjudications, several law enforcement actions that resulted in penalties against massage therapists related to criminal violations. So in the communities that and we had this discussion with the zoning commission as well, if this use was going to be allowed in specific districts, specifically delineated in the zoning ordinance, my recommendation is that you have a framework in the village code to address it. And those that are going to comply will comply. But to not have any framework at all, no license, it would be difficult to enforce against bad actors.
Yeah, did we hear that the definitions provide that framework? That the definitions of massage therapists require a license? The definition of physical therapist is based on some state of Illinois definition? That's my understanding. If that's the case and we have that framework, great. If not, then I would say yes, maybe we need to put something else in there, either the definitions or something.
Sure, but, and I agree, it's just that the village does not have business licenses for that type of establishment, I believe, or for many, if any at all. Right.
Well, we don't.
Right, so that, and in some communities, they adopt the state regulations and they just require proof that the state regulations have been met by licensing. It's just, you don't have anything in the code. The word massage, and I think I pointed this out in the commission, it's not even in the code. So it can be perceived that it certainly is a permitted use and that there are no restrictions on it whatsoever. So,
I guess you could put it as a special use like Mike did on the cannabis, and then you cover yourself with restrictions and regulate it in some fashion as a special use.
it's very common that it's a special use.
And that way you put conditions on the owner to follow A, B, C, and D, and it doesn't become human trafficking. Because strip malls up and down major highways in the region are notorious for this, and as quick as you shut one down, it's reopened. I know what Carmen's talking about in other communities I've worked in.
Go ahead, Tim.
I think what we're trying to talk about, I mean, right now there's massages going on. Some ladies were doing massages in the basement or on the end. I go to somebody in South Elton who does it. I mean, it's above board. It's, so part of me is like, I don't want to have it where we just all of a sudden make them legal overnight and we're like, oh, by the way, go find somewhere else to go give massages. You know what I mean? But also too, get the idea that, these companies, they have potential of being a problem. So is there a way we can kind of come in between where
Special use,
where would they have to ask? In other words, if they're currently doing it, we pass this, how would they get legal, I guess you'd want to call it?
Whatever conditions you put on it when they go before the planning and zoning commission. It could be a lot or a
special use. Even on parking requires special use.
All right, what's the consensus?
Based on the lawyer's, some attorney's recommendations, I would agree with special use.
Okay, everybody agree? All right, special use.
So, I have a couple more here that I think we can go through quickly.
We did 7-2, I think.
We're still on 7-1, we're gradually towards the bottom of it. Energy systems, principal use. I'm suggesting special use in FFB and OSP districts. Power generation on these larger parcels is possible, very possibly desirable, but the community has an interest in deciding where and when it wants solar farms and windmills and
That
such
makes
things.
sense.
So I know that there was some discussion of power generation on some open space. I don't know if anything's ever happened with that, but we don't even allow it in the matrix, so it seems that a special use would be appropriate.
Okay, special use for,
Hey Jim, it does say special use already, doesn't it?
Oh, it's added that?
Yeah, so under energy systems, principal use, it is a special use in 3 of the zoning districts.
I understand.
And that definition includes power generating.
Right, apologies, I missed that in recent revision.
But it doesn't say solar, that's what it's.
It doesn't say solar, but generically as power, it'd be a special use.
So for like wind, geothermal,
Right.
whatever.
On the next line, I have a question for our attorney, if I may. On the line that says utilities for special use all the way across. In section 5.4 says that utilities are exempt from the zoning ordinance. So are they exempt, or do they require special use?
I think it depends on what specifically is defined in the code. I see where you're.
Well, let's think about an unambiguously defined utility like the power company. Because Lamb Communications or Sunny Beauty. So we're talking.
Page 29, Jay.
I can't have the whole ordinance on because it's too big and then it just doesn't move. So what chapter?
So
We're on
it's
7.1.
5.4. 5.4.
It's on page 29 of the 24.
Which is Article
5.4.
So it reads utilities, Jim, under the table, but, and trustee Berson's correct, 5.4 talks about public utilities.
Public
So I can't recall why utilities is included there. I know there are other, I mean, even in 5.4 it talks about things that are exempt from.
Well, a wireless telecommunications carrier is not considered utility in section 5.4, for example.
Or I think we talked about solar energy systems, wind energy systems. I just can't recall what the table's referring to as far as utilities.
Well, I guess I just would like to understand, are the utilities exempt from our zoning regulation or not? Is it?
Well, and to add clarity, I think that the reason it's special, because the utilities section right there clearly says the power generating utilities that we traditionally think are exempt. But we wanted to put it as special use because there are ways that villages have found to regulate on if you had streetlights, for example.
So are
That you would not allow a carrier to just be able to go on a ComEd streetlight provided or as a right without a special use, because they have these small units that were being attached across residential communities in Chicagoland for, what do they call it, micro, to replace the big antenna farms.
Right, so microcells.
The micro cells, and to create the special use was the reason we put it there,
I think
to
Jim
regulate it.
So what 5.4 says is the following utility uses are exempt from the ordinance, and it lists wires, cables, conduits, vaults, levels. These are things that go underground. That's exempt. They're normally in a right of way. It doesn't have to be, so that's exempt. We aren't regulating a conduit that goes underground. If a utility company came in and they wanted to establish a building or a tower or something above ground, that would not be exempt. Okay, so the list of exemptions is very
Well, it
specific.
doesn't say that, so the hydrant is above ground.
Oh, okay, so hydrant,
You know,
a water main.
Wires and cables might probably be above ground. So I'm not arguing about it, I just like to understand whether, is it exempt under 5.4 because we decided that it's exempt? Is it exempt because state statute requires us to exempt it?
State statute.
So if state statute requires us to exempt it, are we allowed to have these special use requirements?
Well, to a certain extent, they are exempt, but not every single piece of property that a utility owns. So, I mean, if ComEd came and wanted to build a 2,000 square
Storage yard.
foot warehouse, on the
Or
north side
a
of
generating facility?
Well, I mean, it would depend. I mean, it'd still be subject to certain provisions or zoning code with regard to where they're locating and where they're constructing their facilities. But when I say facilities, let's say they're structures, they're buildings. But as 5.4 indicates, right, wires, conduits, cables, things like that, it's not subject to that.
What if a major power company wanted to build transmission lines across our town, would we have any recourse?
That-
No, you have no recourse.
Yeah, based on regulations, no. To a certain extent.
So what we settled on here is to put the special use, so if it wasn't a state mandate or federal mandate, we would take some action to try to regulate what we could regulate. But if they're exempt, they're gonna tell us they're exempt and send a strongly worded letter to us and.
Maybe some clarification,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it says utilities,
Yeah.
and that could be read in conflict with 5.4, so maybe there's some clarification that could be made on either the matrix or in 5.4 that indicates what would not be exempt. And then that would be a special use if not exempt.
Thank you, I don't think it requires clarification in ordinance, but thank you for explaining.
Let's
Jim
move
will
on.
work on that, on the definition of 5.4, so we're clear, but.
So, you would like to move on to 7.2?
7.2?
Yes, this is the limitation on short-term rentals, services such as Airbnb. This is section 7.2N, short-term rentals. I added this clause including services such as Airbnb, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the board what we would, whether we feel it was okay as it was, or whether we feel it requires additional clarification. Because I think short-term rental is a pretty broad phrase.
I agree with Trustee Burson. I think the additional clarification, whether we mention a brand name like Airbnb or not, I think it's probably a good idea. That's one people are most familiar with. I like the additional clarification.
Is there a consensus to add to that belt and suspenders more clearly say we don't want?
Yes.
Okay, good.
We'll add that.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Maybe including but not limited to, 'cause, I mean,
Yeah.
most people know Airbnb and VRBO and Google, but there are other ones.
Alright, but not limited to, but for lawyers, like,
On the back side of this page, we've already covered ADUs, so we're down to 8.4.
What number?
8.4, and there's really not really anything on A, so we're down to B. Limitations on home-based businesses, no toxic, explosive, flammable, combustible, corrosive, etc. substances. I mean, it sounds reasonable, except that everybody already has those in their house. So I'm not sure why, we've added that in as a limitation on home-based businesses. We're certainly not going to attempt to police or enforce it. And I generally think we should be putting things in ordinance that we're not going to attempt to enforce.
Just to clarify, this section 8.6 is home-based businesses, page 54. Is that correct, Jim?
No, 8.4, home-based businesses.
Yeah.
Did I
I think it's on page 56.
do I have the paragraph wrong?
54 B3.
Yeah, I've got 54, B3, sections 8.6. This was the most recent one printed out for me.
Yeah.
Okay, my error.
To B, may I speak to that real quickly? The thing that you say really violates, why can't we just add in beyond types and quantities typical for residential use? If you've got 2 bags of fertilizer for your lawn, I don't care. If you've got 120 bags of fertilizer, I might be a little more concerned.
For multiple reasons.
Okay,
So we could
consensus.
keep the language if we put beyond standard residential use.
Yeah, beyond types and quantities typical for
Good,
residential
everybody,
use.
yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Except for maybe radioactive, I don't know, people keep radioactive.
No, it's in your smoke detectors.
That would be at 0, except for your smoke detector.
Yeah. All right, what's the next number?
Home-based.
They're on 8.6E, where we're back to massage therapy, personal care, and mental health.
Did we cover A though? Trustee
No, I
Burson?
kind of skipped it because it was only a 1-word change, and I already got talked out of it by the administrator room.
It's a good reason.
So I jumped down to E, the end of this page. We're home-based businesses, permitted home businesses, and I'm suggesting that we add massage therapy and personal care services as allowed home businesses, along with mental health, which I believe Mr. Brown had already restored for us, is that correct?
I don't think I put it in, I
There
would
was a
say
conversation
that
about it, it seemed
probably would fall
a
under.
meeting or two ago, I thought that it was gonna get added back in.
Yeah, I mean, that would fall under professional services.
Mental health is a professional service, so it's okay.
That's good.
All right.
Yeah,
Then,
I think all through 8, 9, and 10, is everybody?
I'll do it. I have
Okay.
a question about one. First of all, I think it's 8.6D is in dog,
Mhm.
at least on my copy, it is, for permitted home businesses. Again, with all due respect to the professionalism of the industry, which you're familiar with, used to live near a town called West Bend, Illinois, massage therapy and illegality was in the news like every other week. We just saw another article from St. Charles recently, the same kind of thing. I just want to express that, you know, we're going to allow conditionally in commercial districts. Do we have any concerns about permitting it or having a special use, or how should it be handled if it's going to be conducted in a residential district? Again, I have all the highest respect for those that practice it professionally, but I know that there's some that they probably not even really doing or conducting themselves as a massage therapist, but they're calling themselves that, and I would just like to protect our residential neighbors.
Go ahead, Tom.
I mean, call me naive, but I just feel like I've been going to massage therapists for a long time, a lot of them work out of their house. I don't know, I just feel like this is more of an age thing. I'm not saying you're younger than me, but it's just, I feel like, you know, my father-in-law was like, massage, someone's gonna touch me? Only my wife touches me. I get it, okay? But I think the younger you get, it's become more commonplace, it's become less like stigma. And I think with any industry in your house, I don't care what it is, you could have this situation occurring with dog grooming. I mean, the guy wants he wants something extra with his dog grooming. I mean, this can happen. So I don't know it's one of those things that's hard to restrict, really, right? I don't think there's one. Yeah, it's hard to police. I think the only thing I would say is, the more if you were in a massage therapy situation, I would expect how cops find it is probably it gets super popular. You got 20 cars outside this person's house, and they're like, I think we're gonna have to go and get a massage and see what happens, so we can catch the people. So I don't know. I just don't think it's as scary for me. But once again, if you're saying it's something that is a thing where the village can get in trouble for it because it's allowing it or something like that, that's a whole other issue.
It's not really a question for village liability, and I would say that typically the special use framework is for, let's say, single-use establishments. Massage parlors is typically what the special use framework is for. If it's massage therapy or massage services ancillary to physical therapy, ancillary to chiropractic care, if you're going to a DO to get ENT service, manipulation services through an osteopathic doctor. Yeah. That is not part of the special use process. But if it's a standalone, like a vaping lounge, is a standalone, single use. And when I say standalone, the use is standalone from any other use. Those are the ones that are typically subject to a special use process. And those are the types of establishments that we typically hear about in the news when there are violations, whether or not it's a special use or not. So I don't know necessarily that whether it's in a home-based business setting or ancillary to another use that you want it to be considered part of a special use. Because it usually isn't. Right.
So adding it back, I don't think it's a problem.
I think it's happening in the village right now. I think people are doing that. People are going to massage therapists. I think to make it tomorrow like a rule that you can't do it is crazy. I really do. I just think, and they're going to ignore it. They're going to continue to do it. They're doing it for business. It's, they've got it set up in their basement. You go there, like I said, I go to somebody in South Belgium, my wife goes to the same person.
So is there anyone to object adding this into the zoning?
I think my question was more specific to, is it permitted or is it special use? Not, yes, I get you.
Well, in a home-based business, we don't generally make home-based businesses a special use.
It's just permitted, okay.
Does anybody think personal care services needs more wording or is too general?
I assume that's what nails and hair.
Would that be?
Yes.
Maybe it
That's
should
right.
be explained more? I
Well,
or is
that,
that?
it is defined. It's defined. It's
Defined,
defined, I thought I read
okay.
that, yeah. it is.
Okay, and that works.
So that would be
Okay.
added back in. So
All right, so,
what's your next one, John?
That section, we've got another page for, the gas structures, which is our next.
you're done with 7, we're going to 8 then.
7, 1, 7, 2, and 8, 6.
So we're on to accessory structures and lot coverage limits. And I think under that, I think trustee Person is had some concerns and she put it on your desk.
Is it
So-
8.3?
This is amendment number 2, and we're talking about section 6.1, 8.2, 8.1, 8.3, and 8.10.
What?
And so these are grouped together as one proposed amendment, because I thought they tied together. So first, under dimensional standard 6.1, I'm proposing a reduction in the maximum buildable area and maximum impervious coverage of 5% across the board until we get to the R4 lots where they're already squeezed. So R1 through R3, I'm proposing that we reduce this maximum buildable coverage by 5%. I think it's larger than it needs to be, honestly. It's larger than anybody needs. My lot's 1.5 acres. I'm allowed to build a house that has a footprint, not the square footage of the inside, multiple floors and everything, but a footprint of 16,000 square feet. So I could have a 16,000 square foot ranch, for example. Or I could also have a 3-story, 16,000 square foot footprint building, which I think most of us would call a small office building and not a house. So I don't think that the size that we're allowing for maximum buildable coverage needs to be as big as it is. And then I think this ties in then with the maximum detached structure percentage, because the zoning commission, I think, did a very good job of trying to back off of the table that was being used and come up with a percentage across the board for maximum detached structures. And I know that there was one percentage that was tried, and the intention was to give us more than what we had, and it didn't. And then the next proposal we got was 2%, which was more for most people, but it wasn't more for everybody. So if you're in an RE2, for example, then you've got 2 acres, then it's actually less for you than it was before. We were proposing to take that, I'm proposing to take that 5% from the maximum buildable and give it to the detached structures. Then many objections raised in the past about detached structures and was this too hard on the land, was there stormwater considerations and so on. These are valid concerns, but they trade off well against the maximum buildable and maximum impervious. So if you're concerned that someone's 5% of detached structures might be too much for their lot, if we were reducing the overall maximum buildable, then I don't think that we've lost anything in terms of protecting the land. So I'd like to propose we talk about that trade-off to start with.
Jim, our zoning commission, do you remember the discussion on that?
There was just a general feeling to leave these dimensional standards intact. So I said there really was not a lot of discussion on this. I think the one thing we did change had something to do with the farm district, the impervious surface amount, or impervious surface coverage, I think had been what they felt really high, so we changed that. But that was the only change. It was just a general idea to leave this as is.
Does anybody feel like it should be changed?
Yeah, I have some comments here.
What did you add, and then we'll go on.
Did you was first?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say, go ahead.
Nick?
Oh, all right. Yeah, so I had similar notes to Janet. And I had one idea, I mean, I have a lot of ideas for different percentages that we could do, but a really simple way to do this, I mean, we have these really massive maximum building coverages. I mean, they're like 34,000 square feet, 21,000 square feet, 13,000 square feet, and progressively get down to 2,250 square feet on an R4 lot. Yet we give these very modest square footages for a detached structure. And a thought was that we could just simply change the dimensional standards for our districts to total combined building coverage. So rather than even having anything that discusses detached structures, just combine it all into this one table. You've got a grand total of 20, 25, 25. I mean, and in all reality, you could still, I mean, 34,000 square feet, I mean, it's not that obscene of a building necessarily. I mean, a 10,000 square foot building on a 5, 6, 7, 8 acre lot, you know, I mean, it's not completely obscene. I mean, we're giving people 34,000 square feet of building square footage when they go to put their home on an RE1 lot. So I think it would really simplify everything. Just look at these one percentages, and it's really also an environmental and a water runoff thing. You know, a lot of towns, they talk about this 40% rule where you have to start then looking at detention for the water. So I'd like to hear a discussion on that as well.
Jim, can you take it from here?
Yeah, they left it alone. I just want to, not sure I heard things correctly, but the maximum building coverage and maximum impervious surface coverage is for all buildings. So that's not just your home, that's the buildings plus all of the other buildings. So an impervious surface would cover things like having a super large parking lot on your lot. That's I just want to point that out. Like I said, the commission didn't really have any desire to dive into this.
For steel buildings, I mean, what?
Yeah, so.
Impervious is impervious, all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That'd be
So,
really nice.
yeah, thank you, two things. First of all, this comes from Kane County, these numbers, and, you know, they have a staff full of planning professionals that came up with this,
Yeah.
and that live by this every day, and it works. I don't know that, I wanna say that we're qualified in this room to start changing that. I think it works for them, it works for other municipalities, it's worked for years. When it comes to the accessory buildings then, I just wanna point out a few things if we look at increasing the size by percentage versus going with what Kane County has done across the county, or maybe just increasing those. So Jim, I gave Jim a very short presentation just with some images here. The first image is really just the charts, just showing once you start getting to the 2, 3, 4, 5% range, how large or how much coverage or how much square feet you can get to, even on the 2 and 3 acres. And if you go to the next slide, I'm not gonna try to bore people with a bunch of numbers here, but the next slide is more numbers of, you know, buildings. So, you know, in some areas, you might be able to have a, 60 by 80 building that's 4,800 square feet, or some of the numbers that Trustee Bowden were mentioning are more like 100 by 200 plus building. These are so large buildings. We're talking about residential areas here. So next slide, please. So just some examples. You could have a 40-foot by 60-foot garage, which in this case, as pictured, would be a 6-car service center with an office on the side, or, if you want to store 6 collector cars, or old tractors, or whatever you want to do with it. Right now, you can do this in our village, but you need 5 acres. If we were to go to 2%, which is proposed currently, you can do this, but now at 3 acres. If you go up to 5%, all you need is 1.25 acres, and you've got this building, this shop potentially, on your site. Next slide, please. The next is a 50 by 80 garage that would store 2 semi-tractor trailers. You can't have this in our village. We don't allow it at any size. You go 2%, if you have more than 5 acres, you can have this. You You go to 5%, all you need is 2 acres, and you can have this. Now, I'm not assuming that even 1% of people that built a building like this would make it look this horrible and use it for this use. Most of them would probably be well landscaped, would be stored for collector's items or whatever else, but we can't say that it can't be used for this. It's a building. And especially when it gets to commercial vehicles. And we don't say, like Kane County says, that our regulations are for both inside and outside. You can get this. Next one, please. This is a contractor's shop, a 65 by 80 shop for equipment, for vehicles, an office. Right now, you can't have this in our buildings, which are residential areas. The primary use is for a home and for a family, or for people to have their residence, not to be running large-scale businesses like this. At 2%, you start to be able to have it in the 5 acre plus. At 5%, you only need 2 acres or 2.25 acres to have this on a residential lot. I don't think the math works in our favor to prevent people from having contractor yards, from having large-scale businesses. You can stop the presentation there, that's all I have. What I would suggest is a simple upgrade for our residents. Right now, you can have 900, 1,800, and 2880 or 2,800. Why don't we just bump it up? 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. You're going to get a little bit more space, and that's what we find. When we find people coming to us for variances, they're just asking for a little over. And they're not asking for, I want 6 buildings. The 2 buildings also should stay, because those are limited so that I can't have, we go over the animals, and all of a sudden I've got, 4 chicken coops and an alpaca barn and a horse barn and this and that, and you could do all kinds. You could have 6 buildings, 12 buildings. That's not what we need for residential areas. So I agree. I think we should give our folks a little bit more based on their lifestyles here. But I would move 900 to 1,000. I would move 1,800 to 2,000, and I would take the 2,800 and move it to 3,000. That would be my recommendation. Forget about all this complicated math and percentages and what are we going to do there. This makes it a lot easier, and it's consistent with what works for Kane County.
I agree with your calculations, especially because there are experts in Kane County that have put this together originally. But Nick, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that if I were to have done that presentation, I would have done it a little bit different. And instead of showing buildings with semi-trucks in a mud pit, I would have shown a huge building with paddocks on the side, and I would have shown horses with their heads hanging out the side of the building. I would have shown a round bale of hay. I would have shown a tractor parked in one end, and I would have shown chickens running around. I would have shown a beautiful vista of Campton Hills with some beautiful animals on a pasture in 5+ acre zone residential. And potentially another building, because my suggestion would be that we do use a percentage. We don't limit the buildings. And again, we let people control what they do on their property. Now, we already allow people to build their primary structure up to 34,000 square feet. So we are okay with big buildings, but for some reason, we're painting this scary picture of detached structures. And I don't believe that's the case. I really believe that folks need the flexibility to build a building the size that they need it.
Go ahead, Jen.
The last time that we were presented a variance for a garage, it was for the Batista property. They were looking for 1,600 square foot garage, if I remember correctly, and we only allowed them 900 because that was what the zoning ordinance said. So I'm not sure that it's accurate to say that people just are looking for a little bit more. I think people are often looking for substantially more, and one of the reasons that I brought up this proposal to reduce the maximum buildable and increase the maximum detached is because I think it flushes out the real issue here. It's not really about land use then, is it? It's an aesthetic judgment. It's a notion, it's a subjective judgment that some people might think that some people are doing some things that some people might think don't look nice or objectionable to them. And that's not the business that we're in, and I'm not willing to go 1 inch down that road. As for the percentages that Kane County has established, we create no jeopardy and we lose nothing by reducing those percentages in terms of any kind of manageability or anything like that. So the representation that the county experts have figured out these percentages and they're sacred in some way makes no sense at all. If we were proposing to increase those percentages, then that might be a valid argument. But if we're seeking to reduce those percentages, then the numbers that were arrived at by other people at some other time aren't really particularly relevant. I don't actually care too much whether we change the maximum buildable and maximum impervious or not. But if you think that 5% is too much, then I'm basically saying the same thing as Trustee Boatner. It's one pool of buildable space, and especially when we've heard multiple times when it comes to variances that, but for a breezeway, your structure would be okay. So wait a minute, I can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 different buildings if I want in my backyard, as long as they're connected by a breezeway, and the total maximum buildable isn't exceeded. I don't think that doesn't make any sense at all. So when we hear sometimes about things being illogical, this is patently illogical. I can't understand why anyone thinks that we would want to cap the number of detached structures at 2. There are many people in this village that have more than 2 detached structures, and they're not a problem with those yards. They're not an eyesore, and they don't particularly generate complaints. And I would add that when we are considering moving people from F to R zoning, one of the things that we've been trying to convey to them is you shouldn't stress too much over it, because we've tried to equalize between the R and the F zoning quite a bit. So you're not losing much if you're getting moved from F to R. And one of the things you might have thought that you were losing, and you would have been right, is that you had a significantly different rubric under which detached structures were calculated. So if we would like to reduce the number of complaints and requests for variances over detached structures in the future, I think we'd be well advised to not have a limit on the number of detached structures and have a number in excess of 2%.
If you drive around Campton, the village of Campton Hills or Campton Township, people are moving here onto far bigger lots, 1 acre, 2 acre, 3 acre, and there are still buildings going up because they feel they've moved to the country and that they can build in their backyards. There's still buildings. Therefore, I think we do remember zoning protects the neighborhood, it protects the neighbors. And, as far as I see it, the example you gave about the steel or the garage that went up on Old Burlington Road, they came in for variance, and I think that's a great idea. It was discussed, through committee, and they made their decision, and then eventually did allow it, but.
No.
Well,
We didn't
we
allow it.
eventually did.
No, we didn't. We allowed the setback variation, but not the size variation.
Anyway, Ed, you were next.
Thank you, Bridget. Again, what's one thing, inflammatory language, claiming things are illogical, however, there's a difference of it. It's fine. It doesn't mean that logic is not being
I was
applied.
merely echoing Trustee McAulife's previously.
To continue, again, the primary purpose of a residential district, I think, is being lost here. It's for a residence. That's why you're allowed to have a large home. That's why we limit the number of accessory buildings and limit the size, because the primary purpose of why you live in a residential district is not your ancillary use. It's not your whatever you want to do in this gigantic building. And again, as I said, and I think Trustee Boatner missed it, most of the buildings that people build around here are beautiful, and they landscape them well, and they use them for collector things and whatever else, and that's wonderful. But you have to remember that the zoning doesn't say it has to be pretty and cute. The zoning says you can have this building. And that's what we're trying to determine what is the balance for a residential neighborhood that the primary use is people living in their homes, not having a building that's larger than their home and having all this activity going on there. In addition to that, you know, you can have a bunch of breezeways, that sort of thing. That's not true. That would be limited by building codes. It would not be allowed. The other thing that people that think they could have, it's a different rubric, or it could have more accessory structures just because they were mistakenly continually zoned farm, that's also incorrect. You can have additional accessory structures if they are for the primary purpose of agriculture on the property. There was no agriculture going on these properties, so you couldn't have additional beyond 2 accessory structures. Somebody misunderstood that. I'm sorry, but that's the fact. So again, I go back to, you know, you've heard my recommendation, I won't repeat it, but I do think we need to respect the fact that these are residential neighborhoods, and we're seeing a lot of things creeping in here, want to run businesses on them, and that's what we're trying to protect. Is yes, you can have a home-based business, that's fine, but you can't, you can't have all kinds of employees, all kinds of equipment in some huge building that's primary purpose now for your lives of business. That's not what residential areas or neighborhoods are for.
I agree with you, Ed. How about Tom? No, how about Tom?
Is Mike gonna comment on this? Is Mike
I
listening?
think, I thought we
I
lost.
think, no, he's still there, but, he was, and we lost him again.
Okay,
But
I guess my
think
comment.
he was part of increasing it to 2%.
Okay.
And I think if you go up that, one of the charts, and 3% professionally, Jim and I
Yeah.
think that if you do 3, that's your outer limit. I would never go 5 and without saying I respectfully object to anything greater than 3%.
I guess my comment here would be, I'm gonna kick it up to the animals. I really would like to have Mike here for this. I think this is real important. I think this is the thing that I think great points were made on both sides. I'm trying to digest, because I'm not hearing all this, so I want to digest it myself. But I think it might be a thing to kick to the next meeting when Mike's here, to hear what he really says about it. Jim hasn't made a comment yet. I'm not trying to limit comments at all about it. I just think it's something that is important
Okay.
for the people that live here. So.
Consensus to moving it to our next meeting?
Yep. I'm
Yes. Tom, yes, and then Rick?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Jim?
That's fine.
Okay. And Janet, okay.
I had a comment, just as we're going through Janet's, and I don't know if we're done yet, James, so or trustee Burson, I don't mean to cut you off, but because we're going through it in her order, I think, because I thought we were gonna go through it in a list, I may be missing something, so we'll discuss accessory structures. I think there were some changes in there that we haven't talked about that are minor technical things, like changing the height from 20 to 25, but not allowing additional height for agricultural, stuff like that we'll talk about later. But when it came to home-based businesses, I had a couple more comments. Should I make those now, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So one of the changes was previously only residents of the dwelling were to be employed by the home-based business. Now we can have 2 non-family members come into the residential area and be employees. Personally, I'm against that. I don't think we need 2 people standing around having a smoke break when neighbors are out playing with their kids or whatever. And it's a residential area. Again, I don't think you need employees for a home-based business. When you start having outside employees coming, you're kind of going beyond the scope of a home-based business, in my opinion. You want me to stop there and see if anybody agrees with me or not?
Any comments?
My comment is that's the one issue that I have with it. We're expanding it. To me, it seems like we're growing it. And I think, again, I'm trying to look out for all neighbors. I'm for home businesses, but I think that's an expansion that we gotta be careful with. I think it's a slippery slope.
Okay. Well, I think let's move on. We'll discuss this at our next meeting.
Well, I think home-based business is still open to discuss this in here.
Yeah, I think you could decide whether you want 1 employee, 2 employees that are not relatives of the family.
I think trustee Burson has some thoughts on that. I'd like to hear.
Okay.
My thought is that there are lots of forms of business that people could be involved in where they feel that they need some help. Could be part-time help, could be full-time help. Who knows the nature of these people? To suggest that they are automatically smokers, it's sort of like the pictures of the garages with trucks and whatnot. You know, I'm envisioning that the majority of the people with home-based businesses and employees are going to be professional folks. They could be accountants, they could be real estate agents, you know, that have a helper. They could be software people. There could be lots of folks that have helpers. I mean, most of the professional people I know have an assistant, a full, you know, at least a part-time, if not a full-time assistant. And to have two people working in a small professional business at home, very, very possible. You know, I operated a software company for my home back in the 80s, and we had, I think we topped out at 3 people plus me before we came to the conclusion ourselves that it was time to move out and get an office. But you would barely have known that we were there. So I'm not sure what the concern is. Is the concern that there are strangers coming to the area, or is the concern that they smoke? Or what is the concern that they're going to attack your children? What's the concern?
Again, with the inflammatory language, I think the concern is clear. You have two non-family members visiting on a regular basis in a residential area. We heard people having concerns about the bed and breakfast or whatever we talked about a few meetings back. That's less regular than this, and this is something that I'm not saying. Again, we're sort of jumping to everything's honky-dory because I did it and it was great. Well, that sure was wonderful in your example, but we're not using personal examples here. There are possible examples that don't go so well too. So I don't know, I'm just uncomfortable with now all of a sudden we have commercial areas that need renters, and now all of a sudden we're saying, you can have your own business and have a couple employees. I wanted to explore that. At this point, I liked the way it was before, where you can have your own business. It's only, you know, if it's you and your spouse or somebody you live with or whatever, that's fine, but you can't have outside employees coming in, driving and parking every day and operating there. That's what I would prefer.
So as a consensus, the proposed ordinance allows 2 non-family members to come. Is there a movement to desire to lower that number?
My desire would be lower.
Yeah, I would say I would like to lower it. I mean, I think what the potential, the potential is, I go back to, you know, once again, you go back to what, you know, I don't think Janet's wrong by using it as an example. I go back to what I know. I come from a business where, you know, everything gets bigger, everything is more employees. You know, I'm just worried that, what I don't want for the residential areas, and it would never happen in my neighborhood because they would stop it, or, you know, Fox Mill doesn't really care about this because it probably wouldn't happen there, but it's just one of those things where I'm worried that you're getting too much leeway. Now, once again, can it really be policed? No. I mean, how could you ever tell how many people are parking in the driveway or how many people are at your business? It's almost unpoliceable. So I'm almost of the opinion not to just take it out of there completely, just leave it out. Don't even mention employees, don't bring it up, don't have a conversation about it. If they have them, I don't know if we're gonna catch them anyways.
Well, it's when there's an enforcement because someone says.
I know. It's
so
just
you need
gets,
a number,
yeah.
either 0, 1, or the current 2.
It's tough. I would say I would limit it to. I mean, if one makes everybody happy, just to make it so that it can't get out of hand. I think everybody would be. I think it's reasonable. But once again,
So like an auctioneer, we've got 1 on the table. Is there a desire to go to 1 non-family?
I'll get 1.
If we were moving it to our next meeting.
Well, but I think, no, they can get to this one.
Yeah.
Is there, hands on 1 non-family member, is that a consensus? Otherwise it stays 2.
Give us another number.
Otherwise it stays 2.
0 is my number, but apparently I'm the only one.
Half.
You're doing half. Yeah.
No, I'm not for changing it.
You like it for 2?
I like it for 2.
Okay.
Jim?
Yeah, I guess I could go with 1. If we're trying to split it, I'd go with 1 versus 0. I mean, I was more in the 0 camp, but trying to find consensus. So yeah, I'm fine with 1.
2, and then Jen, 2 people. You go for 1.
You do 1. So we change it from 2 to 1 on non-family member, Mr. Brown.
consensus and a good compromise.
I think so.
Continue on the home-based business, they could be, business-related activities may be conducted in any building on the property outside of just the principal building. I'm in agreement with that, actually, I think that makes more sense. I like that box trucks were added to the prohibited vehicle list, and then, I think we already discussed some of the activities that Trustee Person brought up that should be added, to the permissible use matrix, so, yeah, I'm good with the rest of this business.
Okay.
All right.
Are we ready to move on to 9? We still have Sandy Place.
Yes.
I think we got a chance at this one.
Well,
I'm being optimistic.
I've tried to take all the various comments and narrow it. Jim, could you put what I think could be a consensus up on the table? I talked it over with lawyers and the police chief and some of the policemen on
Did you get-
enforcement.
Did you get comment from Mike on this?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Well, Mike's very comfortable with what is
Was
currently stated, but he does see the need to be a little more micro down. So it was essentially all, we weren't gonna say all pickups, because when you define pickups, somebody could have essentially a very large truck, a 450, that most ambulances have a cracker box behind it. You know, you turn into a box truck. So you don't want to say all pickups. Plates are easy for the police to enforce. So we'd say restrict B and C plates. You can have B and C plates, unless they're commercial, and a logo or a label of a commercial entity. You can only have one commercial vehicle on your property, outside, we're saying outside, whether it be B, C, or D. But you can have 2 D-plated, non-commercial, but only 1 D-plated commercial. The police can enforce that very easily. So there's kind of, we'll put the text to it to include some of the Matala language of which, you know, saying what we don't want, but we'd like you to kind of take number A. Is that a consensus? I think it's a consensus, but I want to make sure it is. On the B and C plates. And then a maximum of 2 D-plated trucks for your, whether it be your horses or your hobbyist trailer of RVs. And then a max of 1 D-plated pickup type truck per property. Commercial, one D-plated commercial property, or vehicle on your property.
That looks reasonable to me.
And then the language we had from Ottawa that says, this is not a pickup. You know, the big trucks and describing box trucks, semis, we still put that in as what we're not allowing.
Spell that out.
Spell that out, but the text would basically allow this. The question is, to Trustee Muncie's point in another conversation, do we want to say inside or out? I've got it just outside. I don't think I can regulate the inside very easily, but he does raise points that could be problematic.
Okay.
I think, if someone takes the effort to put an outside structure in their property to store things inside, I don't care what's in there. I mean, I think that's a great way. Let's say a guy is a mechanic and his boss is like, you have the job because I let you take the truck home. Well, and I had the situation at my work. The guy said, I can only build a building. You got okay for it, put the building in, boom, everybody was happy, neighbors liked them. You know, nobody was, and I think it's a great out for the guy if he wants to keep a living going or run a business. Because I have no problem with what you have or what you're doing in your garage, to a limit. I mean, wasn't that going back to full, like a business or something like that we restricted, but no, I think it's a great way of it's like a, kind of like a safety outlet for the whole thing. Where if a guy wants to build a building, he's allowed to, and then we're all good, right?
Well, what if he parks at this driveway, though? You're good with that? If he doesn't build an outbuilding?
No, that's what I'm saying, though. I mean, I like this
One
rule,
like-
but it's, I mean, if he's gonna build a building to store it, well, then why would I have any issue with it at all? None.
Because we still restrict the business being on the
Yes.
site.
Go ahead, Sharon.
I'm trying to get clarity on what we're at, what the question's being asked on D, because we're saying an unlimited number of B and C plates and a maximum of 2 D plates,
I think one's
a
commercial.
maximum of 1.
One
Commercial.
One
Well,
commercial.
B and C are written separate, so we want C is a maximum of 1 commercial D pickup truck.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot what I was doing.
Yeah, but
I mean, that seems fine to me.
You played it, so that the B is non-commercial.
yeah, we left out that word. Let's verbalize it. Because, I mean, some folks might have 3 D plates because they've got a lot of horses, but I don't know that we've got anybody that needs more than two D plates to haul their horses. Ed, wanted to weigh in.
Yeah, just to be clear, we have removed from Kane County the indoors and outdoors storage of heavier vehicles. I'll wait till President Lincoln can listen as well. You know, I just want to make sure we can chime in. So in the previous Kane County ordinance and in 2023, it stated that vehicles in excess, commercial vehicles in excess of what we were allowing outdoors also could not be stored indoors, and it stated that commercial equipment and supplies could not be stored indoors or outdoors. So it was, again, trying to limit that. I'm running a contracting or a trucking business on a residential area. That's what I was asking, should we add this back in? Anything with a higher than a D plate, so you've got a semi, you've got whatever else,
Is prohibited. You want to spell that out?
I would like to spell it out indoors and outdoors, yes. That we can't run a semi-trucking business with 2 semis on a 3-acre lot, just because you had a building big enough to put those 2 semis in. I think, I respect the little water running business, but again, that's not for a residential area.
Yeah, I think the police chief is like, to keep it as a plate, because we all can enforce that. I don't have to train every officer, and it's not.
Yes,
it's
anything
subjective.
higher than D plate, indoors or out. Can't do it. Storage of equipment and supplies.
Who's gonna take the pictures? Who's taking pictures?
I don't think we have,
Can't.
you cannot speak, please.
Yeah, she's.
You're out of order.
Yeah, I guess there's consensus on this language, but do you want to add prohibitions of any plate larger than D? In or out? That's what is on the table.
That would be my preference, yes.
Is there a second, third, and fourth on that added?
Can we have some discussion before we do the consensus?
Sure.
So I'm trying to understand how we are now moving from folks' driveways to what they do inside of their garage or their barn. Like even using the example, even the images are of these semis, just creating a mud pit and this obnoxious noise. You know, I could also, if we want to use semis as an example, talk about the hardworking father who just drove cross country, gets home and parks his semi in a barn. But, you know, we're talking about semis, it could be any vehicle. It can be a plumbing contractor who has an F plate on his heavy duty van and he wants to park it in his pole barn. Now, he has to rent parking. I just don't understand. It seems very subjective. We're kind of painting these horror stories, but there's so much more to it than that. So I think overall, we do not involve ourselves in what happens inside people's homes, in their garages, or their detached buildings. Like, period. I don't think that there's any way we should be involved in that. And I don't know why we want to. What does it matter what's inside a building?
Well, what the police chief says, he's had issues with semis at some farm sites that have bigger pole barns, and they pull out. They're not a problem usually in the summer. they pull out and they warm up at 3:30, 4:30, and he's chasing them. And we've just got him under control. Since the year I've been here, there's been 3 properties that had that problem. And if we didn't have the prohibition about the semis, they would be legal. And, because what they do inside, they pull out onto their open air to warm up in the wintertime is the problem there. And it creates a nuisance, and then we're chasing them on the nuisance ordinance
But
for
that
the,
one,
for the noise violation and stuff. And that's kind of where the chief is at. Because they don't just stay in the barn, they come out and warm up for a period of time, and the neighbors are upset.
Just a response, oh, may I respond? You know, I understand that people are calling in about semi-trucks, but I think that the same things happen and maybe you don't get calls. You know, souped up rear-wheel drive vehicles, souped up diesel pickup trucks. I mean, all of these vehicles, when they start up in the winter, are loud. Neighbors hear them. I've got a guy across the street, I notice it every time when I'm sitting in my backyard, it makes me jump. I mean, it happens, there's noises, things happen, people have to start a vehicle, it's normal. Tractors, what if you gotta start your tractor in the morning? You know, it makes the same noise. I mean, we're restricting, and I really feel like it also starts to get into people's livelihoods, and I really think we're crossing over a boundary that can really affect people's livelihoods. I just don't see where it's any of our business to get involved in what happens in St. Louis.
Just to be clear, this isn't allowed now in an unincorporated area of Kane County. It's not allowed now in the village of Campton Hills. It's not like we're adding all these restrictions. I'm just asking, should we continue to do what hasn't been allowed for years in Kane County and what currently is not allowed in our village? I'm not adding anything. I'm asking, should we keep it?
Yeah, and then to be clear, that's how we've restricted them, because it is against the Kane and village to have semis and larger plated heavyweight trucks. We just don't normally get after the one-off F or H plate if they don't cause a problem to their neighbor. The semis are a little louder, but yes, you're exactly right. Somebody that has a sports car that tweaks the exhaust pipe systems, they're loud. And we go and enforce them for a noise ordinance if neighbors complain. It's not very rare, it's rare though.
Go ahead, Jen.
I have an observation and a question. The 2 deflated trucks made sense to me from the beginning when we first started talking about it. When we combine B and C together though, I interpret that as potentially 3 deflated trucks. I don't know if that was intended. So is it a maximum of 2 deflated trucks, period, and a maximum of one of them is non-commercial perhaps? Or one of them is commercial rather? Are we looking for 3 deflated?
You can end up with 3.
Yeah, is that?
You could end up with 3.
I mean, I don't know if that's what we're going for. That's not what I understood.
Well, that was kind of being the most liberal interpretation would be 3 D plates.
And then regarding the H vehicles and semi cabs and stuff, I certainly wouldn't want one living next door to me. I understand it. Once they pull out from the garage, then it's not indoors anymore, is it?
Right.
So aren't they just as vulnerable as if there wasn't a private side?
Yeah, if they pulled off out of their back big barn.
Or do you mean they
Steel
pull,
building.
or are you saying they pull halfway out, so?
Well, they pull out far enough to warm up in the winter is the problem. The larger trucks, they don't generally just pull out and get out on the city road and go to work. They warm those vehicles up in the winter usually.
So I have no problem with restricting the H vehicles, but I also appreciate the perspective of not getting into people's houses, garages, and other detached structures.
All right.
Tom might want one thing. He's got some experience with these big trucks.
Well, once again, is there a way we can come, I mean, I get the semi thing, I do, you've had experience with it, so it's something that people are complaining about. Once again, we're not talking about neighborhood, we're not talking about Fox Mill, nobody in Fox Mill cares about semis, because it's gonna get kicked out of there in 5 seconds. This is for the people that don't live in neighborhoods like me, and I represent them, and so I do wanna keep it where it's, so once again, is there like somewhere in between D and a semi that we could draw the line, possibly? I mean, we had 2 guys, and I'm just bringing this up as an example, and I don't know what an age plate is, to be honest with you, I have to look it up, and this might be a push to check weights and stuff, but.
The plates is all about weights.
Right, I just don't know what, we had semis, and I don't remember what the plate designation was on my semis, but I've been gone for 2 years now, so, but I'll say this, I mean, there was a couple guys that were at one of the meetings, and I know it's just a couple, but they're like, hey, I'm a mechanic and I have an age plate, what's the big deal? You know, okay, that's kind of the people I'm thinking of when I'm looking at people inside of a building. But I would be open to, you know, if we could say, okay, up to this plate, no, you know. Is there a compromise there? With
Well, I think the zoning commission had that for hours of
Yes.
discussion, and they came down on D.
Okay.
Because that most relates back to the county 1 ton that we had before as the guide.
So they were trying to mirror the Kane County law?
Yeah, somewhat, because, and they're very sensitive to somebody that 1 day a week, he might be on call and has to bring his bigger vehicle. Are we gonna go and snap him up usually? No. It's the continuous.
Okay, so it looks like to me where we're at is I think we have agreement, consensus on everything here except for do we allow these things to be parked inside of buildings, right? Is that pretty much what we're talking about? Yeah. Okay, well, that, I would say, you know, we've made progress. I think that once again, this is one of those things that let's get Mike in here and see where he's at with it. I think this is, and these greater principles, I believe that, you know, we were handed this thing with a unanimous vote. I think it needs to leave this board with a unanimous vote, I really do.
To modify.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's the way I'd like to handle it, but I'd like to hear, you know, someone's opinion that's not here. I think it's real important. We had a meeting with 3, we've had a meeting with 1 missing. I think we should have a greater meeting with that, and maybe at least leave that, you know, close, so right there, it's just that 1 line, indoor, outdoor, what do we do with that?
All right, consensus for putting this on the next agenda for discussion. Yeah?
And possible passage.
Or you want to speak?
Did have one other item on the agricultural natural area districts, just to see if we could get some consensus on that first. The point of that was, the storage, keeping indoors or out, commercial vehicles, equipment, supplies that are principally utilized for the primary purpose of agriculture within the farm zoning district would be allowed. And the storage, keeping of materials or equipment that are used for purposes that are not the principal purposes of agriculture on the property are not allowed. I'm just paraphrasing that. But basically, you can't buy a farm and run a contracting business on just because a farm says you can have big trucks and equipment. The big trucks and equipment you can have on a farm are for that farm or other farm properties which you farm. That's it.
I think that the language we tried to do is doing that, because under the current 2023, I don't know, I doubt it was intentional, but right at the traffic circle at Welcome, the Weiss or Weiss, depending on how you pronounce that last name, they are legal. And they are gonna probably, in all likelihood, not have their bigger vehicles in that steel building related to farming, because pretty clear that he's got somebody farming that, and he's not the farmer of the extra acres above 4. I don't think it's 20, but it's somewhere between 10 and 15. So it's not agricultural uses that are gonna be stored in that big steel building currently, but he's legal and conforms to the 2023 to basically run some type of operation out of that steel building. He is gonna be legal. What you're trying to do is not allow the next one to have farm zoning and have a steel building huge that is running a contractor is what you're getting at, isn't it?
To paraphrase, I guess, I'm not trying to
Specify, yeah, but I give you the
person, but
it's
it's
a
our
good
mission
example.
and vision to protect our aggravated heritage. And allowing our farms to turn into contracting companies is not protecting that heritage. So I think we need to make sure we protect our farms by saying you can have commercial, you can have, equipment and vehicles of a commercial size, but they have to be used for the farm or properties that, that you're farming.
And I think that's what the zoning commission was trying to do, hearing some concerns of contractor yards moving out because they're getting squeezed to our east.
I just have one question about that. And I brought this up, you just reminded me, because what I sent to you was after him bringing this up. So right now, if a guy did, let's say, a guy's running a contracting business and he's like, yeah, bring a load of wire mesh to my residence and put it outside. Is that blocked by this? Currently, is the storage of supplies not allowed? And like wood stakes, wire mesh,
If
trees.
there's a building permit for it, the material is for the building permit.
No, but I mean, like, if he was just gonna store it, like, on the side of his building, could he do that? Could he take, like, like supplies, he could just, half the people wouldn't even know what it was, because you're not in construction, so you'd be like, I don't know what that is sitting next to this guy's property, but when you brought it in, that example, it made me a little nervous, because I'm a little bit like, we're talking about vehicles, but there is a whole, that's what I sold for a living.
Sure,
I had a
yeah.
yard full of supplies, you wouldn't even know what half of it is, most people wouldn't, but it's kind of like, a good example, an electrician would get what? He'd buy extra copper, he gets a deal on copper, and he's like, yeah, send me like three massive rolls. Is this allowed or not?
There is a section on outdoor storage, and I believe it just covers all zoning districts about the storage of materials outdoors. Might run afoul of something in the nuisance code as well, depending on how it's stacked or where it is, or in the front yard. Since I'm talking, can I go on in front of?
Yeah.
Make one point. So trustee Muncy made a good point about the agricultural districts. So, in this example here, it's been expanded a tiny bit, so the intention is that any use that would be allowed in an agricultural or farm business district is an active and legal principal use. All of the vehicles in the service of that would be allowed. So, the Wasco nursery, we could say that's agriculture or not, but there are some other uses that might be approved as special use. So any vehicle that they would need for deliveries or anything would be allowed as well, not just farm. So as long as it's permitted, allowed as permitted use, special use, even I guess for a non-conforming use, that could continue. In the example of someone, leasing out their property for someone as a storage yard, I think the zoning administrator would have he or she would have the ability to go after them and say, that particular use as a storage yard is not allowed in your district, and that's essentially what you're doing, so you need to remove the trucks. And we actually have a couple of adjudication cases that are somewhat similar to that.
If you look at the map that you're approving, there's only one farm business overlay, which is Wasco Nursery. That doesn't mean you couldn't create another that was a farm business, and then by creating that, you would put the restrictions and here their reason for being a farm business, and you could create another overlay like Wasco. Wasco currently is the only one on your map, and that's farm business, and it gives him latitude to do all the things Mr. Brown just enumerated.
Okay. And then one more continuing down for logos. This paragraph was in there. I don't think it's really necessary in the vehicle section. We do have another somewhat similar language in the sign code. So what this thing that says logos is essentially saying is, as long as you're not using the vehicle, that logo is a sign. You're not parking the vehicle, they're just parking to have a sign. And that probably wouldn't occur in residential areas anyway, but we do have a general prohibition in the sign code, and I think that's sufficient. I don't think we want to get into regulating the type of logo or anything on that, but, so if we're allowing a commercial vehicle to be parked there, obviously it could have a logo on it, and we wouldn't care.
Right.
So I don't know if this paragraph E logos is necessary, because it's covered elsewhere in the sign code.
Does it cause a problem if it stays?
You know, when rereading of this, I just think I just prefer not to have it in because I think it's just replicating. It seems rather lengthy and wordy and.
Makes the.
No, it wouldn't make it different, but it's already covered. I think it's covered in a more succinct manner, by number 19 there, it's from the sign code.
All right,
It's.
well,
Yeah.
everybody's good?
Yes.
Okay, so I have 9, C&D place and parking of large vehicles, I have it down for our next meeting. And on our agenda, we have closed session, number 5, but we decided we're gonna push that off to the next meeting as well.
Next meeting starts what time?
7.
7, our usual, yeah.
Not for this meeting, for the next meeting. There are, I think, other trustees may have other items too that we emailed that did not make this list, including barns, fences, gravel driveways, and a few other ancillary things. So I'd like to include those for the next meeting, please.
Okay, will you email that to us?
Yeah, I can email it again, yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. Would everybody be able to start the meeting at 6:30? Because it's going to be a long agenda, our next meeting. Okay, no problem?
No issue.
No issue, yeah?
You know, I hope
Really?
Well,
Yeah.
Mhm.
You might.
Yeah, Mike will be here, and, yeah, I know, it's a position. All right,
I've got one
go
question.
ahead.
So what's the game plan? Next week, we're gonna try to wrestle this all to the ground, and when do we think we then would try to move forward?
yeah, I mean, if you didn't have major revisions in your discussion Tuesday, you could have it on action and make the recommendation to change it with specified reasons. If Jim and Carmen don't think that it's appropriate to edit on the fly, you're legally allowed to edit on it and then approve it. But if it's too large and we don't think we've got clarity and on it, we would say we'll have to push it to the next meeting. But if it's not,
Yeah, I would be in the camp to push it to the next meeting. If, in fact, we do wrestle it to the ground, simply it then gives the public an opportunity
to see the final.
to see the final document and to give input.
So it potentially be instead of December, it'd be December 3rd. For action to approve, whatever you finish editing next week, next Tuesday.
I appreciate the transparency, in terms of the public, but that are you suggesting that we might, have further debate on the 3rd? Are we, after tonight, then we're going to debate it on Tuesday, not have action, put it on for action 2 weeks after that, which might still have more debate if the idea was that you're gonna receive more input from the public or something?
I just think it would be good for the public to have an opportunity to see the finished product. Nothing about so much about the debate. I think we should err always on the side of
They can see, but they
transparency.
can't comment.
It doesn't hurt us. I don't think there's a rush, I guess is what I'm saying. December 3rd or next meeting, it's what, 2 weeks difference? Not a big deal.
Probably gonna be December 3rd.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Could we please, put this in, was not announced or mentioned in the last community house newsletter? Again, I think, should know, please those that are interested not to get our community house newsletter, that this is going on, so that they can, I'm frankly kind of surprised not many people showed up tonight, so.
There was also a calendar.
Was that posted?
Sure. Yeah, there was a calendar error, and I even asked some of the members here,
It was
someone
an
that.
error.
Yeah, because I
Yep.
told Mr. Rooney yesterday that was not on the calendar.
Yeah.
But it was posted properly for a legal meeting, there's no question for the public to think this wasn't a legal proceeding, it was. No, I know, I don't want the public to miss it.
That's what I'm concerned.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
I got it.
Tom?
Motion to
Tom's
adjourn.
got it.
Second.
Second by Janet. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.